Chapter 605. Under the influence of the murderous aura, the blood of the hundreds of thousands of slaughtered animals kept spraying out of their bodies, turning into fountains of blood that rose into the sky. Countless fist-sized beads of blood hovered in the air, turning the world into a blood-red hue. Countless murderous auras were attracted by the aura and kept being injected into the beads of blood. A strong smell of blood pervaded the air, and the sticky smell seemed to have substance as it kept drilling into people's bodies through their pores. Peppermint and Angelica, who stood beside Wuxia, turned pale with fear and dared not to raise their heads. Goldhorn, Silverhorn, and Catfish stared greedily at the countless beads of blood in the sky and the countless corpses of livestock on the ground, their saliva oozing out of their mouths at the same time. Catfish was more concerned about her image, so she used a handkerchief to stop the saliva at the corner of her mouth. Goldhorn and Silverhorn, on the other hand, did not care so much. They opened their mouths greedily, saliva dripping down like a spring. Audiobook, too, poked his head out of Wuxia's clothes stealthily. He gave Goldhorn and Silverhorn a fearful look and cursed under his breath, then gave the beads of blood a greedy look, shook his head, and shrank his head back into the clothes. On the altar, Princess Zhonglu held the bone knife in her hand and began to recite a complicated and abstruse incantation. Rings of gray ripples spread out from her body, transforming into a hazy shadow that soared into the sky. A few miles above the ground, large dark clouds began to gather and spin rapidly, with gusts of chilly wind blowing out of them. Shrill howls could be heard coming from the dark clouds, and gradually, vague shadows began to emerge from them. Wuxia frowned. The ghosts and deities that came out of the dark clouds looked like a group of malnourished little ghosts, and their aura was at most that of heaven immortals. Most of them were little ghosts and deities in the realm of nascent divinity, nascent soul, or even Jin Dan realm. He shook his head discontentedly. Today was the day of the most murderous aura, and countless clans across Pangu continent were holding sacrificial ceremonies at the same time. Perhaps those powerful ghosts and deities had gone to those powerful and wealthy clans to enjoy the rich blood feasts, and would not come to East Sea County, a small place where the first blood sacrifice was being held. Damn it, you're so weak and you still want to take advantage of us? Goldhorn and Silverhorn sprung up into the sky at the same time. They opened their mouths greedily and unleashed a large sheet of bright light, swallowing those imps and deities who had cautiously sneaked out of the swirling clouds. Shrill and miserable howls kept ringing out. These little ghosts and deities from the outer domain never dreamed that they would not get any benefits, but instead become nourishment for Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Perhaps, under the heaven, only Wuxia and his companions could have such a ferocious attitude. On Pangu continent, no other rich and powerful clan would commit such an unbearable act. Just because the ghosts and deities who were summoned here were too weak, they were treated as dishes to go with wine. That was too ferocious. The powerful and influential clans on Pangu continent worshipped these ghosts and deities with great reverence. Even the weakest ghosts and deities could get some leftovers from their sacrifices. Only Wuxia and his companions. No one could describe what the people around Wuxia had done. You invited them to a banquet, and then cooked them as dishes to go with wine. That was too vile of an act. Audiobook watched as Goldhorn and Silverhorn ate and drank happily. These ghosts and deities were the aggregates of the purest energy, and in the hands of those fiend immortals and demon immortals, they were the materials to refine magical treasures. For Audiobook, these ghosts and deities were all spirit pills that could greatly replenish his energy and help him quickly restore his original cultivation base. Opening his mouth, Audiobook leaped out of Wuxia's body. Now a foot long and as thick as a thumb, Audiobook roared with a tremendous suction force coming out of his mouth. With a momentum no weaker than that of Goldhorn and Silverhorn, he began to crazily devour the little ghosts and deities that flew out of the swirling clouds. As soon as Audiobook made his move, Catfish could not stand it any longer. She simply transformed into her true form and flew up into the sky, opening her mouth thousands of feet wide and crazily devouring the ghosts and deities who had just flown out of the swirling clouds. Lord Xianxing also made his move. He transformed into a flying dragon and began to devour these pure energy aggregates. Wuxia was taken aback, and he could not stand it any longer. These energy aggregates were also very beneficial to him. Chaotic energy could even digest dirt and rocks, let alone these little ghosts and deities who had gathered powerful energy themselves. Throwing his head back and letting out a long roar, Wuxia exercised a Dharma idol divine ability. His body abruptly grew to 1,000 feet tall, and he spread his arms. A beam of black light shot out of his chest, which looked like a small black hole, and began to crazily suck the little ghosts and deities that had flown out of the swirling clouds. The 7 foundation elevating technique devoured chaotic energy much more ferociously than that of Gold Horn and Silver Horn. As soon as Wuxia made his move, at least 40 of the 100 little ghosts and deities were devoured by him, and only the remaining 60 were shared by Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Standing under the altar, the faces of Su Qin, Yin Bugui, and 1,000 elites of scouting office darkened. With his hands clasped behind his back, Su Qin shook his head and muttered, "This is the so-called collapse of etiquette and music, and the loss of morality. You offered sacrifices to the ghosts and deities of heaven and earth, and you devoured them just because their overall strength was a little weak. Even those who run black shops are not as ferocious as you." Shaking his head, Su Qin suddenly laughed and said, Well, I'll be shameless this year. If I can make these ghosts and deities into the heavenly star 5 ghosts, they will be much stronger than the Een ghosts I obtained after those people died." Laughing, Su Qin waved all 10 of his fingers. Countless tiny silver beams shot out from his fingertips and interwove into a huge net of light in midair, scooping up dozens of little ghosts and deities, whose cultivation base was roughly in the realm of nascent divinity. Smilingly, he shackled them into thumb-sized spirit pearls and put them into his sleeve. With Su Qin's move, the little ghosts and deities that came out of the whirlpool were struck with a bloody misfortune. Su Qin's net had covered an area of 100 miles in circumference, so dense that not even a drop of water could escape. Initially, there was still hope for 1 or 2 of them to escape from the devouring of Wuxia and the others, but with Su Qin's net, there was no way for them to escape. Yen Bugui's face darkened as he murmured in a low voice, "Collapse of etiquette and music, and loss of morality? Old mister, aren't you taking the side of the evildoer by doing this? TSK, let's not talk about each other. Which one of us is better than the other?" These little ghosts and deities had no effect on Yen Bugui and the others, who had cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture. Therefore, the 1,000 elites of scouting office stood firmly where they were, and did not participate in the feast of ghosts and deities. They barely managed to preserve a trace of righteousness in this world where etiquette and music had collapsed and morality had fallen. Nearly 8,000 little ghosts and deities came out of the whirlpool, but they were all devoured and captured by Wuxia and the others. The combined power of these 8,000 little ghosts and deities was roughly equal to the total magical power of a middle-grade heaven immortal, which was negligible to the current Wuxia. However, the enormous soul power contained in these little ghosts and deities had brought great benefits to Wuxia. His magical power and cultivation base had only increased slightly, but the strength of his divine soul had been tripled. With the strength of his divine soul tripled, Wuxia's divine sense was now comparable to that of a real first-tier heaven immortal. As long as he refined and purified the newly obtained divine soul power with his true flame of life, his overall strength would definitely rise by a great margin. It took him nearly an hour to devour all the little ghosts and deities, and finally, a powerful ghost and deity began to emerge from the whirlpool. A ghost and deity with 6 curved goat horns on its head, its body covered with white hair, and its body vague and indistinct, and possessing the cultivation base of a supreme-grade heaven immortal, swayed out of the whirlpool. As soon as the ghost and deity appeared, it threw its head back and roared, "All offerings mine, all of you, get the hell out of the way, Lao Tzu." This was the most common scene among ghosts and deities, where the strong preyed on the weak. When a powerful ghost and deity appeared, the weaker ghosts and deities would have to retreat and sacrifice all the offerings for the strong ghosts and deities to enjoy. Once the strong ghosts and deities appeared, they would certainly unleash their aura to drive away the weaker ghosts and deities. But after the powerful ghost and deity threw his head back and howled a few times, when he lowered his head and looked around, he was struck dumb. The area around the altar was clean, with countless fragrant blood beads and fleshy bodies waiting for him to enjoy. But those annoying little ghosts and deities were nowhere to be seen. The simple mind of the ghost and deity could not react in time. He glanced left and right, but did not see a single little ghost or deity. Only Wuxia and his companions were standing under the altar, looking at him with great reverence. Laughing dryly, the ghost and deity murmured in a low voice, "Lao Tzu is the first one to come today?" Princess Zhang narrowed her eyes at the ghost and deity, who had the cultivation base of a third-tier heaven immortal, and quietly slit the neck of one of Reverend Yao Yu's clan members with the bone knife. The man had the cultivation base of a 30th-tier heaven immortal. His neck was slit by the bone knife, and his golden immortal blood was lifted up by a murderous aura, turning into hundreds of golden blood beads the size of fists and shooting into the sky. The ghost's eyes lit up as he roared, "Using an immortal as a sacrifice? Wonderful." The ghost deity stretched out his hand and grabbed the descendant of Reverend Yao Yu, who was slowly floating up from the altar. However, when his claws were about 100 feet away from the man, a series of black thunderbolts suddenly roared out from the swirling clouds behind him. A dreadful aura pressed down from the sky, and a gigantic shadow silently appeared behind the ghost's god. The shadow gently slapped the ghost and sent him flying far away. Scram! The shadow only snorted indifferently. Countless lightning bolts and thunder roared out of his body, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Because of his appearance, the vicinity of East Sea City suddenly became pitch black, illuminated only by the occasional flashes of lightning. Wuxia looked at the shadow with delight. It was a ghost of the realm of Gold Immortal, and an extremely powerful one at that. His true form had not appeared on Pangu continent yet, and he had come here through a projection of his power. Even his projection possessed the power of a Gold Immortal, which showed how powerful his true form was. It was because he was too powerful that he could not come here through the stable void around Pangu continent, and could only come here through a projection. Shrouded in a dark cloud, the ghost took a deep breath. All the blood droplets drifting in the void around him shot up into the sky, plunging into the dark cloud along with the corpses that had been sacrificed. Muffled chewing noises kept ringing out, and vague praises could be heard coming from within the thunderclouds. With a bone knife in hand, Princess Zhang killed Reverend Yao Yu's clan members on the altar one by one. Finally, she pierced the blade through Reverend Yao Yu's forehead, fulfilling Princess Zhang Li's vow to take revenge on him. Reverend Yao Yu and all his clan members flew up into the dark cloud. Accompanied by the praises, a great sheet of blood-red light shot down from the dark cloud, and injected into the bodies of Yan Bugui and the 1,000 elites of Scouting Office. Standing next to Wu Qi, Lord Xianxing and the others were also injected with the blood-red light, and their bodies began to tremble violently. Chapter 606. In Zhongning City, Wu Qi's fleshly body had been upgraded to the peak realm of a first-tier heaven immortal. Although the blood-red light fell on him, it could no longer strengthen his fleshly body, but was quickly digested by chaotic energy and turned into his magic power. On the other hand, Lord Xianxing and his companions were far weaker than Wu Qi in terms of fleshly body and magic power. As they absorbed the boundless blood-red light, the strength of their fleshly bodies and magic power rose rapidly. Wu Qi could clearly sense that Lord Xianxing's magic power was breaking through rapidly, from the 36th tier of Heaven Immortal Realm to the 27th tier in just a flash. His body was also making a series of crackling noises, as his fleshly body had benefited greatly. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Catfish, Aobuzin, Peppermint, and Angelica had all benefited greatly from the blood-red light. At the same time, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Catfish, and Aobuzin had their overall strength raised to the same level as Lord Xianxing, while Peppermint and Angelica were forcibly raised to the level of 33rd tier Heaven Immortals. The two little girls screamed in horror. They could not control the enormous immortal energy that suddenly emerged in their bodies, and it was about to leak out. Su Qing gritted his teeth. Starlight flashed around him as his immortal energy rapidly rose from the 36th tier of the Heaven Immortal Realm to the 18th tier. He had cultivated painstakingly for more than 2,000 years, and his understanding of the heavenly Tao was far greater than that of others. All he lacked was the accumulation of immortal energy, so he had benefited the most. Yen Bugue and the 1,000 elites of Scouting Office, including Chi-Chi, exercised the true body of heaven and earth scripture. With the help of Princess Zhonglu, Yen Bugue obtained a large part of the blood-red light, and his cultivation base quickly rose to the same level as Lord Xiansheng, a 27th tier heaven immortal. As for the other 1,000 elites, they had broken through the 36th tier heaven immortal realm. 1,000 lower tier heaven immortals was already amazing enough. As the officiant, Princess Zhonglu alone enjoyed 30% of the blood-red light. A huge amount of power was continuously injected into her body. The power in her body and the power of the ghosts and gods seemed to originate from the same source. Therefore, when she received the power, she did not feel any pain at all. Her entire body was shrouded in 5-colored divine light. Princess Zhongli's long hair fluttered in the wind, and a dreadful aura of magic power spread out from her body. Her power rose rapidly, and it seemed that she was approaching Wuqi's level. Boundless killing intent surged into the blood-red light. The killing intent was transformed by the blood-red light into energy that Wuqi and the others could absorb. The cultivation bases of Princess Zhonglu and the others were still rising step by step. Their auras were getting stronger and stronger. Gradually, purple tribulation clouds started to gather in the sky. As Wuqi and the others were cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture, their breakthroughs would not attract tribulation clouds. But when Lord Xiansheng and the other immortal cultivators broke through, tribulation clouds would naturally come to them. And in such a small area, there were so many people breaking through at the same time. On top of that, they were not just breaking through the first tier. The tribulation clouds they attracted were extremely dreadful, reaching the level of the consecutive gold immortal tribulations. The dreadful aura of tribulation rumbled down from the sky. Lord Xiansheng and the others turned pale, for there was no way they could withstand the bombardment of such a gold immortal tribulation at the moment. Wuqi's expression changed abruptly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Everyone, split up at once. We need to be at least 1,000 miles away from each other to transcend our tribulations." Before Wuqi's voice could fade away, the hazy black figure in the sky cried out in surprise. "Why are there so many immortal cultivators in the sacrificial ceremony of the human race? What a mess. Things on Panga continent are getting more and more interesting." Accompanied by a deep roar, the huge black figure casually shot out a palm, and the tribulation thunder that filled the sky was smashed by his palm. The tribulation thunder that had been brewing in the tribulation cloud was grabbed by him and stuffed into his mouth. He chewed it like a bean and swallowed it in 2 mouthfuls. The gold immortal thunder tribulation seemed to be of great benefit to him. After swallowing the thunderbolts, his figure became much clearer. He nodded with satisfaction and cried out in a low voice, "Humans, if you can offer 360 more blood sacrifices of the same quality as today, or better, I'm willing to become the ancestral god of your clan and let you borrow my power." Laughing in a deep voice, the shadow said, "O woman of the officiator, remember my real name. I am Lei Meng. When you have gathered the same offerings as today and hold the blood sacrifice, call out my real name directly, so that no one will come and compete with me. Hee. Or you can hold 360 blood sacrifices at the same time, and I can become the ancestral god of your clan directly." Amidst a deep roar, Lei Meng slowly disappeared, and the vortex of clouds in the void shattered with a deafening rumble. Clearly, before he left, he had destroyed the void tunnel opened by Princess Zhonglu with a spell. He did not want the ghosts and deities, who were as strong as him, to know that Wuqi and the others had sacrificed immortals. Even the blood essence and souls of ordinary humans could bring great benefits to these ghosts and deities, let alone thousands of immortals and itinerant cultivators. Wuqi glanced at Princess Zhonglu and said with a frown, "Is it good to have an ancestral god?" Princess Zhonglu turned into a ball of colorful light and flew in front of Wuqi. Beaming with joy, she nodded and said, "Of course it's good to have an ancestral god. With an ancestral god, we can borrow his power directly. With the richness of the offerings we have offered, we can borrow up to 60% of his divine power. 60% of the divine power of a mighty ancestral god, who is as strong as a top-tier gold immortal? Although it would cost countless offerings to borrow their power, it was worth it, right? Reverend Yao Yu had borrowed a gold immortal item from Myriad Immortal Alliance to capture the green dome shark. It was the same principle. If one wanted to borrow the power and item that did not belong to him, he would have to pay the price. Nodding vigorously, Wuxia said in a deep voice, "Then I'll have to join to use attack on Myriad Immortal Alliance with enthusiasm. By hunting those immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance, we can not only gain military credit, but also get more immortals to sacrifice to Lei Meng. TSK, why do I feel like I'm a human trafficker?" Princess Zhonglu just smiled cheerfully. The murderous aura gradually dissipated, and the golden sunlight sprinkled down from the sky. There was not even a trace of blood sacrifice left on the ground where a blood sacrifice had just been carried out. Princess Zhonglu gently thrust out her palm, and the altar disappeared without a trace. Wherever the sun shone on, in the newly opened fields on the fertile soil, the newly sprouted sprouts were emitting a faint glow in the sunlight. The sea breeze blew over from the ocean, fluttering the clothes of Wuxia and others. Looking at the towering golden red wall of East Sea City in the distance, Wuxia suddenly threw his head back and laughed. As Wuxia laughed, Su Qin, whose cultivation base had skyrocketed, was the first to laugh. Strong starlight wheeled around him, and from time to time, a deep rumbling could be heard, as if the stars were rotating in the void and rubbing against the magnetic force in the outer domain. Yen Bugui laughed as well. With a leap, he leaped tens of miles into the air, and threw out a punch. An invisible force swept away all the clouds within 100 miles. Lord Xianxing let out a long laugh. With a wave of his hand, a halberd appeared in his hand. A dark cloud rose under his feet, carrying him up to Yen Bugui, who was showing off his prowess in the sky. Then he swung the halberd and thrust it down toward Yen Bugui like a rainstorm. Yen Bugui cheered loudly. He swung his fist, which was stronger than diamonds, and met Lord Xianxing's halberd head-on. For a moment, the air was filled with a cacophony of clanking and deafening rumbles that sounded like the rumbling of thunder. The people in East Sea City were so frightened that they all shut their doors and windows, not daring to come out. Ao Buzan's eyes were burning with envy. He dragged his 3-foot-long body and flew up into the sky, beckoning his front claw at Catfish Flood Dragon provocatively. "Ugly fish head, do you want to fight me? Hee, how many years has it been since Lao Tzu last fought someone? I'll let you have the chance to fight Lao Tzu's virginity after he was reborn." Catfish Flood Dragon's eyes turned green with anger. "Ugly? Damn you!" she roared furiously. She swung her huge hammer, rolled up her sleeves, and charged at Xiang Ao while howling. A deafening rumble echoed out once again, and both men were locked in a fierce battle in midair. Catfish Flood Dragon's hammer was powerful and heavy, while Ao Buzan's body was made of iron. Both men fought head-on in midair, as if they were enemies. Gold Horn and Silver Horn exchanged a glance, then shrunk their heads and smacked their lips, then quickly swam toward East Sea City. Lei Meng had enjoyed all the offerings in the blood sacrifice just now, and the brothers were drooling. So, it was only natural that they wanted to find some delicious meat to feast on, or they would feel sorry for themselves. Panicked, Peppermint and Angelica ran up to Princess Zhonglu and Wuqia. Because of the blood sacrifice, the two little girls had suddenly advanced from Jin Dan realm to 33rd tier heaven immortals. With their current cultivation base and divine sense, there was no way they could control such a tremendous power. Both sisters were so frightened that they burst into tears. Not daring to be careless, Wuqia and Princess Zhonglu hastily cast a restrictive spell to lock up the enormous immortal energy in the sisters' bodies, allowing the immortal energy to gradually improve along with their cultivation base and comprehension of the Tao. Wuqia finally understood that the power obtained from the blood sacrifice was too strong and too fast. For immortal cultivators, when their cultivation base and divine sense could not control the skyrocketing immortal energy, their bodies would explode and they would die. On the contrary, the warriors and oracles of the human race could use the blood sacrifice unscrupulously, and they would not have to face the same trouble as immortals. In any case, by using Reverend Yao Yu's entire clan and hundreds of thousands of livestock as the blood sacrifice, they had inadvertently attracted a mighty deity like Lei Meng, which had brought great benefits to East Sea County. Among the top-tier heaven immortals, there were Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli. Among the 18th tier heaven immortals, there were Su Qin. Among the 27th tier heaven immortals, there were Lord Xianxing, Catfish Flood Dragon, Ao Buzan, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Yen Bugui. And among the heaven immortals, there were 1,000 elites of scouting office. In Diyu, such a strength was already a power that only a third-grade province could possess. In addition to that, East Sea County had a population of 1,030,000 newly recruited soldiers, and a large amount of money and resources that Wu Qi had obtained from Mount Moon Gazing. Together with Su Qin, an imperial advisor who was proficient in government affairs, and Princess Zhongli, who was resolute in killing and did not know what a soft-hearted person was, the development of East Sea County immediately entered the fast lane. A year later, East Sea County had become very different from before. During this year, Wu Qi had also devoted himself to the war between Diyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance, and had made countless contributions. Chapter 607. On Mount Black Duck, Wu Qi kicked the head of Daoist Fat Duck, the lord of Mount Black Duck, and sent it flying. The once picturesque Mount Black Duck was now stained with blood, and the corpses of cultivators were strewn all over the place. At least 400 cultivators in Daoist robes had been killed, and another 200 cultivators were kneeling obediently on the square on top of the mountain with their hands over their heads, surrounded by heavily armored soldiers who emanated a murderous aura. Laughing merrily, Huang Liang dragged a few young and beautiful female cultivators towards the square. As he walked, he shouted, "Your Excellency, these few girls are in their prime, and the oldest is only 19 years old. He, they are all virgins, and they are of the best quality." Wu Qi waved his hand, indicating that Huang Liang could do whatever he wanted with the few female cultivators. Huang Liang and the few hundred men lieutenants of Ningbo City were overjoyed. Without hesitation, they carried the few female cultivators and rushed into a pavilion off to the side. Before long, screams and begging filled the air, followed by the sound of bodies hitting each other and vague moans. The few young and beautiful female cultivators on Mount Black Duck were occupied by Huang Liang and a few other captains, and there were also several hundred beautiful serving ladies on the mountain. Wu Qi gave a few military officers nearby a hand signal. Immediately they understood what he meant. Excitedly, they led groups of soldiers and rushed towards the serving girls, dragging them, who were crying and begging for mercy, into a pavilion off to the side. According to the military order of Diyu, adultery was strictly prohibited during the war, but immortals, their families, and servants were not protected by the military order. Even if it was a charming vixen who took the initiative to seduce you, and if a general of Diyu dared to have any improper conversation with her during the war, the military order of Diyu would have his head chopped off. But no matter how many women related to immortals were raped and abducted during the war, the military order of Diyu would never protect these unlucky women. All the living beings under the heaven and earth were the living beings born on Pangu continent. They were all spirit beings protected by the heavenly Tao. Therefore, Diyu had ordered them to be strictly protected. On the other hand, immortals were beyond the 3 realms, beyond the 5 elements. They had broken away from the category of humans, and even more so, they had violated the laws of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, Diyu's military order only applied the cruelest methods of killing to the immortals, without the slightest bit of warmth. It had been a year since Wu Qi led the army from Haizhou to battle. In the Battle of Black Duck Mountain, Wu Qi led 3,000 private soldiers of the Yu family to besiege Black Duck Mountain for half a month, before they managed to breach the mountain. They killed Daoist Fat Duck and all the high-level immortals and itinerant cultivators, and only captured about 200 itinerant cultivators below the nascent divinity realm. The soldiers had been engaged in a series of fierce battles, and there had been almost no rest for a year. So Wu Qi simply allowed them to do whatever they wanted in order to improve their fighting strength and morale. Even if he strictly enforced military discipline and forbade these officers and soldiers from doing anything to these female cultivators and serving ladies, according to the laws of Great Yu, these female cultivators and serving ladies would still be sold into brothels, and their fates would not change. The massacre of Myriad Immortal Alliance had been going on for more than a year. After the blood sacrifice ceremony a year ago, Wuxia had led dozens of elites of scouting office and 3,000 private soldiers of the Yu family to join the main force of Zhong province's army and sweep across the land. Last time, Bo Zhongfu had sent 100,000 private soldiers of the Bo clan to reinforce Ningbo city. He had wanted to establish his power in Zhong province, but in the end, the city was destroyed by the joint attack of 3 gold immortals, and the 100,000 elite soldiers were turned into smoke. Bo Zhongfu was so angry that he almost fainted. Myriad Immortal Alliance had destroyed more than 200 cities of 9th-grade provinces in a row, which infuriated human Emperor Diyu, and he issued an edict to exterminate the alliance. Bo Zhongfu immediately mobilized his army to besiege the strongholds of itinerant cultivators in Zhong province, and the 3,000 soldiers led by Wuqi were assigned to the left wing of the army. While Wuqi was besieging Black Duck Mountain, Bo Zhongfu's third son, Bo Yunting, was leading tens of thousands of soldiers to besiege Blue Phoenix Rock, which was 30,000 miles away. Black Duck Mountain had gathered all the itinerant cultivators within 10,000 miles, and under the leadership of Taoist Fat Duck, they were fighting against the army led by Wu Qi. Meanwhile, at Blue Phoenix Rock, Hua Qingfeng, a famous itinerant cultivator in Zhong province, had gathered a large number of itinerant cultivators to fight against Bo Yunting. The battle there was even more tragic than in Black Duck Mountain, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Some soldiers, led by their generals, were enjoying the beautiful bodies of the captured maidservants, while others, who did not care much about women, were searching the entire mountain and looting all the treasures collected by Taoist Fat Duck. A large number of gold, silver, pearls, corals, gemstones, hawksbill turtles, and other valuables were brought out, piling up into a small hill in the square. A flying ship came flying over the sky, and dozens of oracles from the Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County of Hai Province drifted down from it. They bowed respectfully to Wu Qi, then pulled out immortal detaining needles, god-suppressing talismans, and other restrictive magical artifacts to capture the 200 lower-grade itinerant cultivators who were kneeling on the ground in the middle of the square. The flying ship landed slowly, and the 200 cultivators boarded it. After that, it sped back to East Sea County. Wu Qi looked up at the white clouds in the sky and did a quick calculation with his fingers. Currently, there were more than 6,000 itinerant cultivators in the dungeon of East Sea City. But the quality of these itinerant cultivators was far inferior to the cultivation base of Reverend Yao Yu and his clan. It would take a long time for him to fulfill Lei Meng's request, complete 360 sacrificial ceremonies, and gather enough sacrifices. But as Diyu had attacked Myriad Immortal Alliance, and many itinerant cultivators were caught in the crossfire, it was not difficult to capture some of them alive. As long as the war lasted for more than 10 years, Wu Qi was confident that he could gather so many itinerant cultivators as blood sacrifices. In the distance, the military supervisor of the prefecture overseer of Zhong province was counting the number of cultivators killed, calculating how many immortals with the cultivation base of heaven immortals and above were killed. Every corpse of an immortal or itinerant cultivator counted as a military contribution, and 50% of the loot had to be turned over to the central province treasury. This portion of the loot would also be counted as military contribution. Of the remaining 50%, Wu Qi, as the commander-in-chief of the army, could get 20%. 40% of the remaining 80% would go to Huang Liang and the other officers, and the remaining 40% would be divided equally among the 3,000 soldiers. The military chief was busy with his work. Wu Qi was sitting on top of a rock, overlooking the bloody Black Duck Mountain. Slowly, he fished out a jar of fine wine and took a few big gulps from it. He had no idea what Myriad Immortal Alliance was trying to do, but the sudden action of the alliance had not only caused a great loss to Diyu, but it had also brought a disaster to the itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent. When the human emperor's wrath spread out of Yuxiong Plain and drove the army under his direct command out of Yuxiong Plain, the future of the itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent was destined to be bloody. The core members of the Ascending Immortal Hall and Hidden Immortal Hall, the initiators of the rebellion, were still fighting Great Yu's army with their men. But 70% of the idle allies in the Wandering Immortal Hall had chosen to withdraw from the alliance, fleeing to outer heavenly realms and Pangu continent. They are courting death. Wuqi shook his head and finished the wine in a few gulps. After smashing the jar, Wuqi fished out a silver medallion from under his sleeve. The medallion was engraved with the image of a ferocious-looking Qilin, who was surrounded by 6 floating clouds. It was Wuqi's current military rank medallion in Diyu's army. Great Yu's military system was extremely complicated, and it could even be said to be extremely complicated, especially the military system of the upper echelons, which used the titles of divine beasts and birds to determine the ranks of the generals. Wuqi still could not figure out the whole system until now. However, the military system of the middle and lower echelons of Deyu was quite simple. The military ranks were divided into 3 grades: bronze, silver, and gold. Bronze was the rank of lieutenant, silver was the rank of major, and gold was the rank of general. There were 9 grades for lieutenant, 6 grades for colonel, and 3 grades for general. They were marked with descending mountain tiger, Qilin, and sun-devouring flying dragon respectively. General could serve in the military court of the 3 upper-grade provinces, colonel could serve in the 3 middle-grade provinces, and lieutenant could only serve in the 3 lower-grade provinces. In the past year, Wuqi had led the army to conquer 27 colonies of itinerant cultivators, killed 679 heaven immortals, and captured more than 6,000 itinerant cultivators whose cultivation base was below heaven immortal. All these military merits had promoted Wuqi to the highest grade of official colonel in Diyu's army. As long as he made enough military merits, he would be promoted to the rank of generals in Diyu's army. Among the 3,000 private guards who accompanied Wuqi on the expedition, more than 100 of them were the lineal and collateral descendants of Yu clan. They had also gained a lot of military merits, and were promoted to the ranks of lieutenant and colonel. With military merits and official military ranks, they could leave their clan's territory and take up important positions in other provinces, or simply apply to be transferred to Yuxiong Plain and join the imperial army of Diyu to fight for a better future. Wuqi had reaped great benefits in this expedition, and the sons of Yu clan who followed the army had also reaped the benefits they deserved. Wuqi's relationship with Yu clan had deepened, and he had led the army and won every battle, which made him the most eye-catching character in Yu clan recently. He looked up into the sky and calculated the time. Then he took out the topographic map of Zhong province, which he had obtained from Bo Zhongfu before he left, and browsed through it. Starting from Black Duck Mountain, he crossed a distance of about 3,500,000 miles, and came to another place where itinerant cultivators gathered, Black Qilin Cliff. According to the information sent back by the scouts of Scouting Office, nearly 100 heaven immortals and nearly 10,000 itinerant cultivators had gathered there. Almost all the itinerant cultivators in the nearby counties had been gathered here. Although the itinerant cultivators were scared out of their wits when the army of Diyu set out, some of them were wise enough to join forces to protect themselves. When these immortals and itinerant cultivators gathered together, they possessed an amazing combat strength. It was not an easy task to wipe out a gathering place. After pondering for a long time, Wuqi heard the moaning and panting in the pavilion gradually stop. Only then did he rise to his feet and snap. Somebody, send all the captured servants and maidservants to Zhongning City in flying boats to be sold. The rest of you, assemble the army and march to Black Qilin Cliff. Military commander, make an inventory of all the armaments, bone talismans and other items. If there are any shortages, quickly ask third young master to supply us. Following Wuqi's order, all the generals answered with a loud voice, and the army immediately began to move in an orderly manner. Just as the army of 3,000 boarded 3 large flying boats and was about to set out, a gust of wind came whistling over from afar, and a few oracles clad in gray robes revealed themselves amidst the gust of wind. One of the oracles snapped. Third young master has ordered the army of Zhong province to rest and reorganize on the spot, and the leading generals will follow us to Blue Phoenix Rock for a meeting. Wuqi looked at these oracles in confusion. They were the emissaries sent by Bo Yunting. But why did they want the army to stop and reorganize? Wuqi took Bo Yunting's letter from the emissary, unfolded it and gave it a quick glance, then suddenly cursed it out loud. The angel Lu Bang, the king of Han, has come to Zhong province to mediate. King of Han? Lu Bang. Fuck. Chapter 608. According to Wu Qi's military rank, he was a first-grade military officer, and his rank was not even 100 among all the military officers. Therefore, he obediently stood in line according to his rank. Bo Yenting, who was sitting behind his desk in the tent, gave Wu Qi a glance and gave him a slight nod, but did not greet him. The silhouette of Wu Qi and Wu Qi had perfectly fused into one. A bright glow rose from his body, amidst which, a clear voice rang out slowly. The military minister of Hai Province's military court, Tan Lang of Zhong Province Military Academy. Two beams of golden light shot out of the longbow man's eyes and swept across the silver medallion, producing a large sheet of silver light. Abruptly, the qilin on the medallion transformed into a ball of light the size of a human head and rushed out, roaring at the sky in a gruff voice. The 6 clouds around him transformed into 6 balls of colorful light and wheeled around the qilin for a while. Then a thin beam of silver light shot out of the qilin's mouth, which formed the outline of Wu Qi's face. Then it pounced toward Wu Qi. On the cloud platform, no one moved. Reverend Li Yang, who was following beside the chariot, frowned. Under each stone pillar stood 3 longbow men, each standing 100 feet tall. They were clad in heavy golden armors and holding huge battle axes with exaggerated shapes. Their bodies were densely covered with pale golden fiend runes. Their cultivation bases were strong enough to fight against Wu Qi, which meant that their actual fighting prowess was strong enough to fight against a lower-tier gold immortal. The longbow man gave a simple and honest laugh, then cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said, "This way, Your Excellency." The people of Longbow Kingdom stepped aside and made way for him. Wu Qi left his personal guards outside the tent, and the officers stationed on the cloud platform would come and greet them. Meanwhile, he himself strode into the gold-plated tent located right in the center of the tent. The various phenomena that appeared on the token were one of the methods used by the DU military to verify the identity of the generals and prevent the immortals from spying on them with the art of illusion. The restrictive spell on the token was so profound that even with Wu Qi's current cultivation base and knowledge, he could not figure out the origin of the restrictive spell. In short, unless it was a primordial immortal who disregarded his dignity and personally tried to deceive him, no one could deceive him. From the outside, the golden tent was divided into 2 parts, measuring only about 1,000 feet in both length and width. But once inside, it suddenly lit up. It was a completely different world. Not only was it Bo Yenting's headquarters, but it was also where the supply camp and the craftsman camp of the army were located. Upon entering the tent, there were 2 entrances on the left and right, one leading to the supply camp and the other to the crafting camp. The entrance in the center was 10 miles away, and it was the passage that led to Bo Yenting's main tent. But more than a year ago, in Hai Province, Bo Yenting had led a private army of 100,000 soldiers to reinforce Ningbo City, and in the end, Myriad Immortal Alliance killed all his soldiers with a star attack. The resentment nearly drove Bo Yenting mad, so when the human emperor issued the decree, he led the army and launched a storm-like attack on the itinerant cultivators in Zhong Province. Blood flowed like rivers, and corpses were strewn all over the place. He had personally killed more than 1,700 immortals, which made him a truly fiendish figure. Blue Phoenix Rock, which used to be beautiful and filled with flying phoenixes, had become a wasteland. With the main peak of Blue Phoenix Rock as the center, 18 layers of defensive immortal formations within a radius of 1,000 miles were broken by Bo Yenting's army. Every time one of them was broken, it was a catastrophic disaster. All the mountains around Blue Phoenix Rock had collapsed, and the ground had sunk for hundreds of miles. Countless huge ditches had appeared on the ground, and black smoke and poisonous gas kept spewing out of the ground, making the main peak of Blue Phoenix Rock look like a living hell. With a light punch, he smashed the table, which was made of pure gold, into pieces. Bo Yenting snorted coldly and cried out, "I can't wait to kill this bastard." But he is an immortal king, an angel conferred by the celestial court. So, when you see him, remember not to act rashly. Let's see what he has to say first. Bo Yenting was a burly man about 12 feet tall, with a face that looked like a xieji. His skin was blue, and his muscles were bulging. He was full of strength. As soon as he rose to his feet, he let out a deep snort, but a boundless aura emanated from him. Wuxia could not help but praise him in his mind. Bo Yunting was Bo Zhongfu's third son, and it was said that he was a high-ranking general in the imperial army of the human emperor. He had come to Zhong province with his father, and was now in charge of the military court in Zhong province. He was a man with outstanding strength and means. Bo Yunting snorted coldly. Suddenly he strode forward, drew out his sword, and swung it at Reverend Liang. Blue Phoenix Rock, which measured 100 miles in circumference and stood 100,000 feet high, was now the only place where green water and green mountains had been preserved. However, most of the hundreds of magnificent palaces, pavilions, eaves, and bridges on Blue Phoenix Rock had collapsed, and dozens of them seemed to have been destroyed by Great Yu's soldiers. Although the fire had been put out, black smoke was still rising slowly into the sky. The golden tent was also an extraordinary spatial artifact. It had a space of about 100 miles in circumference, and was stocked with all kinds of resources, enough to support an army of 200,000 soldiers in a continuous war for more than 3 years. On top of that, its defense was so strong that it could not be breached unless more than 10 gold immortals were attacking it with their prime energy essence and powerful gold immortal items. While Wuxia was sizing up this group of people, he heard a soft and graceful voice of a lady coming out from the chariot. "The angel has arrived. Why aren't you kneeling down and greeting him? What are you waiting for?" "Hee, my king, don't touch me, it's itchy." The only person who could attract Wuxia's attention was Reverend Liang, who was standing on a white cloud and following closely behind the chariot. When Wuxia walked into the tent, 500 to 600 military officers had already gathered in the tent, which was large enough to accommodate 1,000 men. These military officers were the military officers of the 300 provinces under Zhong province's rule. Like Wuxia, they had each led a small team to attack the gathering places of itinerant cultivators. Now they had all been ordered to come here. Wuxia's face was a little blue, and Bo Yunting's face, which was already blue to begin with, had darkened at this moment. It was as if a thunderstorm was brewing in his face, and he suddenly grabbed the hilt of the sword hanging at his waist. A square-shaped cloud platform was floating in the air a few miles in front of the Blue Phoenix Rock, about 10,000 feet above the ground. On top of the cloud platform was a large, gold-plated tent. On both sides of the tent were neatly arranged military camps, which seemed to be able to house about 5,000 soldiers. 2 rows of 24 huge stone pillars were erected outside the golden tent. Each of these pillars was 30 feet thick and 300 feet tall. Huge braziers were placed on top of these stone pillars, and green pillars of flame shot up into the sky. The pale green light illuminated the entire Blue Phoenix Rock, giving it a glossy green hue, bringing with it a murderous chill that made one shudder. In the sky above the Green Phoenix Rock, a slim female immortal wearing a green dress and a green veil was standing on a white cloud. Around her were large patches of green light that looked like bird feathers that spun rapidly, creating ear-piercing sounds in the air. Dozens of disheveled immortals and itinerant cultivators were hovering around her. Some of them were stained with blood, some had their bodies pierced through, and some had their arms chopped off. Apart from the green-clothed female immortal, none of them were unscathed. Reverend Liang flew to the cloud platform, pointed a finger at Bo Yunting, and snapped, "How dare you be so arrogant when the celestial ambassador has arrived? Do you have no respect for the celestial court and the great celestial emperor? Lu Bang, the king of Han." Bo Yunting twitched his thin lips and said with a cold grin, "An immortal king conferred by the celestial court, a mere 32nd tier heaven immortal, who has been conferred the title of immortal king by the great celestial emperor? I can't believe such a man has become the envoy of the celestial court stationed in Diyu, and has directly intervened in the war of Zhong province as soon as he arrived." Taking out the silver medallion that represented his military rank, Wuxia held it up and cried out, "I am the military minister of High Province's military court, Tan Lang of Diyu's military academy." After waiting for another hour, hundreds of generals arrived one after another, filling up the large tent. These were all the generals under Bo Yunting's command. Only then did Bo Yunting rise to his feet, place his hands on the desk, and say in an unfriendly tone, "Someone is going to stir up trouble in Diyu's campaign against the many immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent. Wuxia arrived at Blue Phoenix Rock with dozens of his personal guards. The dull beating of war drums could be faintly heard coming from all directions. Nearly 100 large flying ships were wheeling in the distant sky, on which sat large groups of armored soldiers on their decks, ready to launch another attack. There was a large group of feathermen hovering in the sky. About 50,000 feathermen soldiers had joined the siege on Blue Phoenix Rock. They were shuttling around the rock in groups, forming a tight defensive system to prevent immortals and itinerant cultivators from escaping. In addition to the 60 pairs of beautiful girls whose cultivation bases were no higher than the realm of Jean Dan, the chariot was surrounded by 3,000 heavenly soldiers clad in golden armors. Each of them was valiant and high-spirited, with their noses pointed skyward, and an air of arrogance that could send anyone tumbling from 800 miles away. The strongest of these soldiers was a 30th-tier heaven immortal, while the weakest was probably a nascent divinity cultivator. Outside the tent, a chariot was hovering in midair, pulled by 3 winged dragons. Behind it were 3 smaller chariots, each driven by a flood dragon. Next to these 4 chariots were 60 pairs of beautiful girls, holding various ceremonial weapons and looking down at the golden tent with smiles on their faces. Some of them were holding flower baskets, from which they kept pulling out flower petals and throwing them down. For a moment, the air was filled with a fragrant aroma, and it really looked like a paradise of immortals. Wu Qi and dozens of his personal guards transformed into a gust of wind and came to the jade platform. As soon as he showed himself, a longbow man took a step forward and stopped in front of him. The burly longbow man lowered his head to look at Wu Qi and cried out in a deep voice, "Who are you?" Over 1,000 military officers in the tent sprang into action. None of them had a cultivation base lower than 3 stars of the first Panga heaven, and each of them was like a dragon or a tiger. They turned and stamped their feet at the same time. A deafening rumble rang out, and the tent shook a few times. A murderous aura towered into the sky, almost materializing inside the tent. Bo Yunting gritted his teeth and strode out of the tent with over 1,000 captains, who were emanating a ferocious aura. While Bo Yunting was still telling his men not to do anything rash, a soft voice drifted in from outside the tent. "The celestial envoy has arrived. Who is the commander of the army? Come out and greet him at once." The face of Reverend Li Yang of Green City was still fresh in Wu Qi's memory. Even in his dreams, Wu Qi wished he could kill this evil immortal with a sword. But he did not expect that he would appear here, right next to the new celestial envoy. "Damn it!" Bo Yunting cursed under his breath, then cried out in a deep voice, "Generals, follow me out of the tent to greet the celestial envoy." Chapter 609. It was a clean slash, without any tricks, and not even a gust of wind was stirred up. The crowd only saw the sword slashed down with a shrill whistle, and then Reverend Li Yang took a sudden step back. The void behind him disintegrated abruptly and sucked his body into it like a black hole. Although Reverend Li Yang had retreated quickly, the sword still slashed across his body, leaving a tiny bloody mark from the corner of his left eye to his chin. A stream of blood mist sprayed out from the back of Reverend Li Yang's head. The sword intent had pierced through his head, ripped open his brain, and caused a severe injury to his brain. Such an injury was nothing to a gold immortal, as he could heal it with just a little bit of immortal energy. But the sword intent had shattered his brain, damaged his immortal soul, and destroyed some of his memories. In other words, his understanding of the heavenly Tao had been slightly damaged. Reverend Li Yang suddenly appeared 1,000 feet away, with purple gold blood oozing out of his 7 apertures. His aura had dropped significantly, and his cultivation base had dropped from the 7th tier of Gold Immortal Realm to the 8th tier of Heaven Immortal Realm. Although Bo Yunting had failed to kill Reverend Li Yang, it had caused him a great loss, causing him to lose a tier of his cultivation base. Ordinary celestial immortals would have to spend 100,000 years in order to break through to the next level. If an ordinary gold immortal wanted to break through a tier, he would have to rely entirely on his own understanding of the heavenly Tao, and it would take him several eons without any success. Reverend Li Yang was backed by Green City, and his ancestral master was his grandfather. Ever since he was a child, he had been fed with countless spirit pills and miraculous medicines, and had been forced into his brain by someone. When he became a gold immortal, the many elders of Green City had been teaching him everything that a gold immortal needed to know, and all the profound principles that they, the elders, had already mastered. As a result, Reverend Liang was able to break through to the 7th tier of gold immortal realm with ease. The speed of his progress was only slightly slower than Lady Dark Gold Water, which made him a rare genius. However, it still took him nearly 100 periods of time to cultivate from 8th tier Heaven Immortal to 7th tier Gold Immortal, and countless spirit herbs in Green City, as well as the painstaking efforts of many elders in Green City. Bo Yunting's sword had not only destroyed Reverend Li Yang's cultivation base, but also indirectly destroyed the countless spirit pills, miraculous medicines, and countless efforts that Green City had spent. Reverend Li Yang raised his hand and stroked the tiny bloodstain on his cheek. Suddenly he howled hysterically. "How dare you! How dare you! How dare you attack an angel's retainer? You audacious thing, you actually dared to injure me?" The retainer Wuxia grinned coldly. It looked like Reverend Li Yang had climbed up a high branch. The registrar was the one who helped the angel organize all kinds of documents and organize the official correspondence. He could be considered a close confidant of the angel. Since the current angel was an immortal king conferred by the celestial court, Reverend Li Yang was at least a close confidant of the immortal king, and his official rank in the celestial court was comparable to that of an ordinary heaven lord. But the official rank of the celestial court was not very useful on Pangu continent. Wuxia looked at Reverend Li Yang gloatingly, wishing that Bo Yunting would give him a few more slashes, and it would be best if he could bring his cultivation base down to the realm of Heaven Immortal. If that happened, Wuxia would not mind killing this guy right away. Bo Yunting did not even look at Reverend Li Yang, who was roaring at the top of his lungs. He coldly swung his sword, wiping away the faint bloodstain on its tip, then sheathed it and sneered at the chariot in midair. "Celestial Ambassador, keep your dogs in check. If they dare to bark again, Lao Tzu won't mind killing them all." "How dare you!" A loud shout was heard coming from the sky. Wuxia raised his head and saw a burly man, standing over 10 feet tall, with a body as square as an anvil used for forging iron. He was clad in a suit of green gold armor, and held a pair of 9 feet long coiling tiger halberds in his hands as he leaped down from the sky. Wuxia arched his brows. He could not believe that his divine sense did not detect this burly man just now. He gave the chariot pulled by the 3-winged dragons a suspicious glance. The chariot was shrouded in a faint cloud of smoke. Clearly, there was something mysterious about the chariot, which had blocked Wuxia's divine sense from probing. The burly man had leaped out of the cloud. Wuxia frowned as he scanned the burly man with his divine sense. The golden green armor worn by the burly man was very extraordinary. In Wuxia's divine sense, he saw a total of 9 layers of immortal light wrapping around the burly man, each composed of an immeasurable amount of light. No matter how hard Wuxia's divine sense tried, he could not penetrate the immortal light to find out the burly man's actual strength. With a swoosh, the burly man plunged down from the sky like a shooting star with a pair of heavy halberds in his hands. "Good." Bo Yunting let out a long cry. A crescent-shaped shield appeared in his left hand, and his right hand drew his sword. He raised the sword backhandedly and met the man's halberds head-on. A deafening clang rang out, as Bo Yunting staggered back dozens of steps. His legs gave way and he fell to the ground on his buttocks, stirring up a large cloud on the platform. The burly man let out a furious roar as his body bounced tens of miles up into the air like a rubber ball. Wuxia had a good eyesight, and he could see a deep sword mark on both halberds of the burly man, which nearly broke the halberds into 2. However, it was clear that the beefy cultivator's halberd was an immortal artifact of a very high quality. Although it was badly wounded, its vitality was not damaged at all. The halberd was slowly healing up. However, as the sword mark gradually healed up, the radiance on the surface of the halberd gradually turned dim. The 2 coiling tigers on the surface of the halberd, which were brimming with vigor, suddenly turned weak. It was as though they had been castrated. Bo Yunting sprang to his feet, his right arm trembling as he raised his sword. The sword, which was originally as dazzling as a pool of clear water, had become dim and lightless. There were 2 obvious nicks on the sword, and dense cracks like spider webs densely covered the body of the sword. It seemed that the sword had been completely destroyed. The weapons forged by the Diyu army were not as mysterious as the immortal artifacts forged by the immortals. They only pursued hardness, toughness, and weight, and few weapons would add any additional damage such as wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. Bo Yunting's sword was shattered, but as long as the fragments were collected and reforged, it would be a good weapon again. On the contrary, the two halberds of the burly man were left with deep sword marks. The damage was not light, and it would take a long time for them to recover. Bo Yunting dropped the sword and slapped the shield on his left arm. "What a good man! You are much stronger than that mad dog," he exclaimed. "You are a real man, much stronger than that mad dog. It makes me think highly of the celestial ambassador to have such a good man under his command." For chariots slowly descended from the sky, surrounded by many celestial soldiers, generals, and beautiful girls. The bead curtain in front of the first chariot slowly parted, revealing a dozen gorgeously dressed female immortals, all of whom were devastatingly beautiful. Their clothes were extremely thin, as if they were just wrapped in a thin veil, and they were escorted by an immortal king, who was dressed in imperial ornaments. He had a handsome face, but the expression on his face made people feel that there was something wrong with him. With a loud thud, the burly man, who had just been knocked flying away, landed on the cloud platform. He put away his halberds, strode to the immortal king, and carefully waited on him. The immortal king laughed and slapped the burly man on the shoulder, then threw his head back and said, "Bo Yunting, the third son of Bo Zhongfu, the prefecture overseer of Zhong province. You are also a famous young hero in Diyu, but Lao Tzu. No, I have a brave general like Fan Kuai, so I'm not afraid of you." Bo Yunting put away his shield and stared at Fan Kuai, then nodded and said, "I'll remember you, Fan Kuai." Fan Kuai, a man with a rough face full of bulging muscles that made him look like a devil, laughed, then pointed a finger at Bo Yunting and said through clenched teeth, "Boy, sooner or later, Lao Tzu will be beheaded." The immortal king Liu Bang snorted and interrupted Fan Kuai's fierce words. He narrowed his eyes at Bo Yunting and said with a smile, "Fan Kuai likes dog meat the most. He said he would cut off the head of a black dog and invite General Bo to a soup pot. TSK Diyu. Aha you xia shangzhou. I can't believe the origin of Diyu is on Pangu continent. Wonderful, wonderful beyond words." Puffing out his chest, Liu Bang beckoned behind him as if there was no one around him. "My dear subjects, come and have a look at the army of the human race on Pangu continent. How is it compared to our army? Hee, what a majestic army. Wouldn't it be better if it were mine? I could lead them to wipe out the two old fools next door." Wuxia narrowed his eyes. Liu Bang, the immortal king Liu Bang, the king of Han. Does he mean it, or is it his nature? If it's intentional, isn't it too superficial? But is it really his nature? This emperor is like a rogue. Two middle-aged men dressed like scholars and a valiant young man in a black armor walked out of the three chariots behind them. When they came to Liu Bang's side, their auras suddenly fused with Liu Bang's, so mighty that even Bo Yunting took a few steps back in shock. Wuqi gave the three men a deep look. The two scholars ignored Wuqi's gaze, but the young man in the black armor suddenly turned around and glared back at Wuqi. The young man's gaze was as sharp as a blade, and it made Wuqi's eyes sting. Frowning, Wuqi exerted his eyesight, and a beam of cold light shot out of his chaotic divine eyes as he fearlessly struck back at the young man. The young man's eyes went wide as he exchanged a fierce glance with Wuqi. A loud boom rang out in the void, and then Wuqi and the young man squatted down with their arms over their eyes at the same time. Both of their eyes were red and swollen, and tears were streaming down their cheeks, making them look wretched. Liu Bang gave Wuqi a surprised look. Shaking his head, he suddenly turned around and waved at Blue Phoenix Rock. "Phoenix Fairy Hua Qingfeng, is it? I can see that you have a good figure, and you must be very beautiful. Well, I am the king of Han conferred by the Celestial Court, and my status is more than enough to match you. You are now my concubine, so let's consummate our marriage tonight." As soon as Liu Bang finished his words, everyone present was shocked. Bo Yunting, Wuqi, and the others looked at each other speechlessly, while the people around Liu Bang were used to it, and their expressions did not change at all. Phoenix Fairy Hua Qingfeng, who was standing over Blue Phoenix Rock, was stunned. Why is an immortal king humiliating a lowly immortal like this? Lu Bang rolled his eyes, and his expression suddenly changed. Chapter 610. How can it be a humiliation? This is a favor, a favor. Lu Bang waved his hands and feet as he turned to Hua Qingfeng, who was a few miles away, and said, "You are a beauty, and I am an immortal king. An immortal king and a beauty are a good match. I have money, power, and a backer. I have millions of soldiers under me, and I guard the important western region of the heavenly court. I have 36 star venerates, 600 heavenly monarchs, and 3,000 immortal monarchs. Why are you hesitating when you have such a good man?" Clapping his hands, Lu Bang laughed and said to Hua Qingfeng, "Let's consummate our marriage tonight. Shall he draft an imperial edict and send it to the great celestial emperor? Hua Qingfeng is my new title, and she is now Consort Phoenix." Behind Lu Bang, one of the two middle-aged scholars had 3 pupils in his eyes, purple, gold and red, which made him look very strange. He nodded slowly and answered in a deep voice. Overjoyed, Lu Bang turned to Fan Kuai and said, "Go, bring that beauty to my chariot." Birds of a feather flock together, so those around a beauty are naturally beauties. Bring all her maids as well. Fan Fei responded with a resonant voice. He darted out like a flea, not allowing Phoenix Fairy Hua and Qingfeng to fight back. The pair of halberds darted out, bringing up a large amount of thunderflame, and smashed into the earth veins underneath Blue Phoenix Rock, completely cutting off the 2 earth veins. Instantly, the last defensive formation on Blue Phoenix Rock lost its energy supply, and the faint glow suddenly disintegrated, transforming into a rain of light that drifted in the air. There were 2 gold immortals guarding the rock as well. When they saw Fan Kuai rushing toward Hua Qingfeng, they roared furiously at the same time, and shot out 2 beams of auspicious light toward Fan Kuai. One of the 2 beams of auspicious light was a phoenix bracelet inlaid with a golden dragon, and the other was a white jade sword with a tortoise shell. On top of both gold immortal items stood a vague humanoid figure. They were the item spirits who had cultivated into a human form and obtained mighty divine abilities. Grinning hideously, Fan Kuai snapped, "I'm Fan Kuai, the Vanguard General serving King of Han, the Golden Dragon Tiger General of the Celestial Court. How dare you offend me, itinerant immortals? Attacking Lao Tzu is disrespecting the Celestial Court. Do you want your whole clan to be executed?" The 2 gold immortal items slowed down abruptly. While the 2 gold immortals hesitated, Fan Kuai had already rushed in front of Hua Qingfeng and punched her in the head, knocking her unconscious. There were 4 little maidservants around Hua Qingfeng. When they saw their master was knocked unconscious by Fan Kuai, the 4 girls, who were only in the gold core realm, roared furiously in unison, and unleashed 4 beams of green light at Fan Kuai. Grinning coldly, Fan Kuai sprayed out a mouthful of purple gold airflow, and the 4 sword beams shattered into a cloud of smoke and dust as if they were made of flour. The 4 girls cried out in alarm, and were about to flee when a dragon-shaped beam of golden light flew out from Fan Ku's waist, circled around the 4 girls, and tied them up like rice dumplings. Laughing loudly, Fan Ku brought them to the front of Lu Bang's chariot. After throwing the 5 beauties into Lu Bang's chariot as if they were bags of straw, Fan Kuai waved his hand behind him, and the 2 halberds that had cut off the underground energy veins flew back to him. Carrying the halberds, he strode to Lu Bang's side and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, Consort Phoenix is here." Lu Bang raised his head and said with a faint smile, "Good, you've done me a great service." With a reserved smile, Lu Bang looked at Bo Yunting, who had a strange expression on his face, and said, "Third young master, I'm here on behalf of the Celestial Court. Aren't you going to invite me in? Not to mention good wine and meat, you should at least have a cup of good tea, shouldn't you? You nobles of Du are very extravagant, so a cup of tea shouldn't hurt you, right?" Bo Yunting had never seen a man as mischievous as Lu Bang. After hearing Lu Bang's words, he clenched his teeth and said, "Somebody prepare a banquet and entertain His Excellency the Celestial Ambassador with good wine and meat." Glaring fiercely at Lu Bang, Bo Yunting said with a sneer, "We only have the strongest liquor in the army, the soul-burning blood, mixed with flame grass. I wonder if His Excellency can get used to it. Lu Bang put his hands on the jade belt tied around his waist and strode into the tent indifferently. Of course I can get used to it. There is no liquor in the entire universe that I can't drink. Soul-burning blood? That's a nice name, and I wonder how strong it is. TSK Third Young Master, you can't be stingy. There is wine, meat, and beautiful girls. How about 300 singers and dancers? You are the third young master of the Central Province Overseer. After exchanging a glance with Wuxia, the black-armored young man slowly rose to his feet and pointed his right index finger at Wuxia. The young man's eyes were a strange golden-red color. Apparently, when he exchanged a glance with Wuxia just now, all the capillaries in his eyes had burst, and that was why his eyes were dyed this color. Wuxia also rose to his feet and shook his head. His eyes were not damaged, for the power of the chaotic divine eyes was beyond Wuqia's estimation. However, his eyelids were shaken, and the corner of his eye was cracked, with a faint trace of blood sliding down his cheek. He looked more seriously injured than the black-armored young man. Seeing the young man's provocative gesture, Wuxia smiled grimly and cried out in a low voice, "I'm Tanlang, the military minister of High Province. May I know your name, Your Excellency?" The young man blinked, then turned and followed Lu Bang into the tent. As he walked, he said in a gloomy voice, "I'm Han Xing. Remember my name, Tanlang. Your head is mine." Xiao He, who had 3 pupils in his eyes, squinted at Wuxia, then clasped his hands behind his back and walked toward the tent. The scholar walking beside him gave Wuxia a curious look, then shook his head disapprovingly. Wuxia heard them talking and laughing in a low voice. Marquis of Huayin has not had an opponent for a long time. I'm afraid he's excited to see a prey this time, and has even taken a fancy to a young man like me. So they took Wuxia as their prey? Wuxia grinned and gave the backs of Xiao He, Han Xian, and the others a glance. As Bo Yunting came out to greet the thousands of military officers outside the tent, Wuxia followed the procession into the tent. Some interesting ideas were tumbling in Wuqia's mind. He could not wait to find Xiangyu as soon as possible. Even if it would cost him a lot of effort, he had to bring Xiangyu to Pangu Continent. Lu Bang, Xiao He, Han Xian, Fan Kuai, and the handsome and elegant middle-aged scholar, who did not sign up, should be Zhang Liang, the most famous of the 3 heroes of the early Han dynasty. When they fought with the mighty army of Xiangyu, as well as the elite army of Great Chu, who had merged with Xiangyu, it would be a wonderful battle. Not only Xiangyu, but also Yingzheng. He had to bring Yingzheng to Pangu Continent. It was Xiangyu who destroyed Daqin, but it was Lu Bang and his companions who inherited the world of Daqin and founded the Han dynasty after the Qin dynasty. If the first emperor, Yingzheng, and the ancestor of Han dynasty, Lu Bang, did not fight to the death when they met, Wuqia would not be happy. Interesting, very interesting. Wuqia narrowed his eyes and almost burst out laughing. He had been operating on Pangu Continent for a long time, and now he had a great advantage, which was enough for Yen Dan and others to sneak into Pangu Continent. When the expedition was over, he would return to the East Sea City and start working on it immediately. He had to bring these old enemies to Pangu Continent for a grand meeting. At the thought of this, Wuqia could not help but murmur in a low voice, "The gears of fate have begun to turn." Hiss. All the hair on his body suddenly stood up, and he shuddered because of the vulgar words he had just said. However, this feeling of sitting behind the scenes and controlling some things, letting some enemies suddenly meet, was really good, really good. The space in the tent was suddenly enlarged by more than 10 times, and many logisticians quickly placed more than 1,000 tables in the great hall. The aroma of wine and meat wafted through the air, while delicious wine and delicacies were brought to him like flowing water. The aroma of wine was mixed with a scorching heat. Sure enough, it was the soul-burning blood, brewed with the liquid of tobacco. Wuqia had heard of the famous name of this strong wine before. It was a wine that could burn a wild bull alive with just one gulp. Instead of calling it a good wine, it was more like a poisonous wine. For those whose cultivation base was not strong enough or whose fleshly body was not strong enough, drinking this wine was tantamount to suicide. Sitting in his seat and looking at the blood-red, sticky soul-burning blood in the bronze wine vessel, Wuqia could not help but glance at Bo Yunting, who was sitting opposite Lu Bang at the end of the tent. The third son of Bo Zhongfu was not a pushover. It was obvious that he was trying to show his power to Lu Bang. All human generals were strong, and they could fight head-on against the powerful immortal techniques of immortals with their physical strength alone. Every human general with a high cultivation base was thousands of times stronger than an immortal of the same level. Relatively speaking, unless they were immortals who specialized in body cultivation, the fleshly bodies of ordinary immortals were much weaker than those of human generals. As for the soul-burning blood, if taken in large quantities by human generals, it could stimulate the circulation of their blood vessels and help them temper their fleshly bodies. However, if an immortal consumed it, he could only refine it, but if he did not practice the right cultivation method and could not dissolve the tobacco juice, it would be like a mortal consuming a large amount of arsenic. It was a clear show of power, a clear slap in the face. Wuxia sniffed and cursed inwardly. There was something wrong with the wine in the vessel, and the concentration of tobacco juice was at least 10 times higher than the real soul-burning blood. Bo Yunting was not trying to show his power, he was simply trying to kill him. Glancing at Bo Yunting, who was sitting motionless, Wuxia suddenly laughed. Interesting, it was getting even more interesting now. Suddenly, a bell rang, and 300 strong and vigorous feathermen girls, clad in fine leather armors and carrying short swords on their waists, marched into the tent. There were no singers and dancers in the army, so Bo Yunting's logistics officer simply called in the 300 feathermen girls to perform a sword dance. The girls cupped their fists and sang a song to the generals present, then drew their short swords and began to dance gracefully in the tent like gusts of wind. The swords merged into a large curtain of light as the girls danced gracefully, filling the tent with a cold gleam. Sitting next to Lu Bang, Fan Kuai's expression flickered slightly. He suddenly rose to his feet and stood behind Lu Bang, staring with wide eyes at the girls who were waving their swords. Bo Yunting grinned. He suddenly raised the specially made bronze vessel on the table, which could hold half a liter of liquor, and cried out, "Generals, let's toast to the King of Han. Ha ha ha. The King of Han is the celestial envoy of the celestial emperor, and it is an honor for us to choose Zhong province as his first stop to mediate the dispute. If we hadn't beaten those immortals so badly, His Excellency the celestial envoy would not have chosen Zhong province as his first stop." All the generals present burst into laughter. Bo Yunting raised the vessel, fixed his eyes on Lu Bang, and said with a cold grin, "Come, Your Excellency the celestial envoy, let's have a toast to welcome you." Under Lu Bang's unsightly gaze, Bo Yunting drank half a liter of soul-burning blood in one gulp. Chapter 611. Wuxia finished the wine in his goblet, and looked at Lu Bang with the thousands of military officers in the tent, waiting to see how he would deal with the embarrassing situation. The soul-burning blood was not something that Lu Bang, a mere 32nd tier heaven immortal with a weak immortal body, could bear. Once the wine entered the stomach, it would be a disaster. Once the immortal body was destroyed, even if the immortal soul still existed, how many years would it take for it to recover? Lu Bang squinted at the goblet in front of him, then slowly rolled up his right sleeve with his left hand, carefully picked up the goblet, and slowly poured the wine into the goblet on the ground. He smiled faintly and said, "The first goblet is to the heaven. The heaven has a spirit, and the heavenly Tao protects and breeds all living things. How can I not drink this goblet to the heaven?" Wuxia was stunned, while Bo Yunting's face had shrunk into a ball. He stared blankly at Lu Bang, and it was obvious that he wanted to pounce on Lu Bang and smash him to death with a punch. After gritting his teeth and staring blankly for a while, Bo Yunting poured himself another goblet of wine, then raised his goblet again and said, "Your Excellency Celestial Emissary, you've come a long way. Ha ha ha, have another goblet, and then we can get down to business." Bo Yunting and all the military officers drank up the second goblet of wine, while Lu Bang picked up the goblet and poured the wine on the ground. He looked at Bo Yunting with a smile and said, "The second goblet is to Pangu continent. Without the grace of Hutu, how could all living things survive and multiply? We can't disrespect such a grace." The corner of Bo Yunting's eyes twitched as he gritted his teeth and offered a third goblet to Lu Bang. However, Lu Bang still poured the third goblet of wine on the ground, then said to Bo Yenting with a smile, "The third goblet is to the ghosts and deities of heaven and earth, and to the souls of our ancestors. Without their protection and guidance, how could all living things survive in this world? The third cup of wine must be given to them." Wu Qi shook his head. Why was this Lu Bang like an oiled loach? He couldn't get a hold of him at all. It was really difficult to make him look bad. Laughing bitterly, Wu Qi picked up the wine jar and poured himself a full cup of wine, then gulped it down in 2 mouthfuls. Lu Bang poured 3 cups of wine on the ground, then smiled at Bo Yenting and said, "Let's finish all 3 cups of strong wine. Tonight, I'm going to consummate my marriage, and it's a delightful event, so I can't get drunk. Change it to some gentle and fragrant wine. This is wine that is only suitable for men to drink before going to the battlefield. It's not suitable for this king to drink too much." Bo Yenting's eyes turned green as he glared at Lu Bang. Then he sneered and said, "It's indeed a good excuse to consummate our marriage." Lu Bang just smiled and looked up and down at the various furnishings in the tent, not listening to Bo Yenting's words at all. Bo Yenting gritted his teeth. In the face of a cunning and shameless man like Lu Bang, there was nothing he could do. Clapping his hands, Bo Yenting summoned his soldiers and brought Lu Bang a cup of rice wine, which tasted light and did not contain any tricks. Only then did Lu Bang laugh heartily. He took the initiative to pour himself a cup of wine, then repeatedly toasted Bo Yenting. Xiao He and Zhang Liang had also changed their wine cups to light wine. Both of them were well versed in the field of astronomy and geography, and they had come up with all kinds of toasts to liven up the mood. Their wine was so light that even ordinary warriors could drink 17 or 18 liters of it without getting drunk, let alone immortals. According to Wu Qi's estimation, the alcohol content of the soul-burning blood was at least 70%, and the strong smell of the wine and the strong medicinal strength in it. In just an hour, hundreds of military officers in the tent could not hold on any longer, and were carried out of the tent, their bodies flushed red. The pores of these military officers opened up, and a strong smell of alcohol and a strange heat kept spreading out of their bodies. Wu Qi also felt dizzy. Although his fleshly body had reached the peak of the first-tier heaven immortal realm, it was not convenient for him to absorb the wine with his chaotic energy in the tent. So he could only rely on his fleshly body to hold on. By the time he had drunk 25 liters of soul-burning blood, his skin had turned fiery red, and all his pores had opened up, with tiny flames constantly bursting out of them. Wu Qi felt as if his muscles and bones had melted, and some wonderful changes were taking place. Feeling tipsy, Wu Qi struggled to force himself to sit behind the long table. As the celestial ambassador sent by the celestial emperor of the celestial court, Lu Bang had come to Zhong province to mediate the war. Wu Qi wanted to see what Lu Bang wanted to do. It would be a pity if he did not witness the show with his own eyes and passed out because of a little wine. Damn it, this soul-burning blood is really potent. Wu Qi cursed under his breath as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. Even his fleshly body, which was at the peak of the first-tier heaven immortal realm, could not withstand the attack of the wine. If it were an ordinary immortal, he would definitely die after drinking it. It was simply a poison. Fortunately, Lu Bang had poured out 3 glasses of wine in a shameless way. Otherwise, Lu Bang would have been dead by now. When there were only about 100 military officers left in the tent, including Wu Qi, Bo Yenting, who was overwhelmed by anger, finally calmed down. He put down the wine vessel, frowned at the empty tent and said lightly, "I've had 3 rounds of wine, and I'm satisfied. It has been a year since you took office, and this is the first time you've used your power. What brings you to Zhong province?" Lu Bang had drunk about 100 liters of rice wine. He did not use his immortal energy to dispel the drunkenness. Instead, he enjoyed the feeling of being drunk, and deliberately made himself half-drunk. Leaning on Fan Kuai's thigh behind him, Lu Bang glanced at the maidens who were still dancing in the tent, then said with a laugh, "It's been a year since I took office. You can't blame me for that. The women on Panga continent are excellent, wonderful, and beautiful. I've only hooked up with a few stunning beauties in Liangzhu, and they've given me a few concubines." Taking a deep breath, Lu Bang counted on his fingers and said with a smile, The land in Liangzhu is very expensive, so I've bought a piece of land and built a Chengel palace, measuring about 100 miles in both width and length. It took me more than a year to build it. But how can I not build a palace? As an emissary, my term of office is 10,000 years, and I have to live in Liangzhu for that long. Without a palace under my name, what about my new concubines? Wuxia was stunned, and the other military officers in the tent exchanged glances, speechless. As an emissary, Liu Bang had not been busy with his official duties for more than a year after he took office. Instead, he was busy buying land, building a palace, and taking in concubines. Wuxia smiled and breathed out a deep sigh. A supreme-grade talent. If Liu Bang had behaved like this in those years, it would be hard to imagine how Xiang Yu could have fought with him for so many years. But did Liu Bang, who had founded the Great Han Dynasty, really behave like this? Wuxia shook his head slightly when he saw the disapproving look on Bo Yenting's face. Since Bo Yenting had begun to look down on Liu Bang, he had been fooled. Liu Bang was a shameless and despicable person by nature, but if you really treated him as a scoundrel and used the same methods to deal with scoundrels to deal with him, you would definitely be the one to suffer. With a cold smile on his face, Bo Yenting, whose skin was also flushed, pressed his hands on the table and waved them off. The dancing feathermen girls in the tent left one after another. So you are busy running your family business in Liangzhu? Said Bo Yenting with a cold snort. In that case, is the celestial ambassador's visit to Zhongzhou really to mediate this conflict as stated in the official document? Shaking his head, Bo Yenting did not wait for Liu Bang to answer, but gave his opinion. Myriad Immortal Alliance is so audacious that they have used the stars to destroy more than 200 cities in Diyu, killing and injuring hundreds of millions of people. The human emperor has ordered all provinces to send out armies to encircle the alliance. Emissary, you should be discussing this matter with His Majesty in Liangzhu. You really shouldn't have come to Zhong province. Liu Bang waved his hand lazily and said with a long sigh, Your Majesty is too difficult to deal with. In front of him Lao Tzu. I can't even speak, let alone discuss with him. With a long sigh, Liu Bang took out a black pearl the size of a fist and said softly, So I have no choice but to come here and discuss with you, the commanders of the various provinces who are leading the war. Well, in fact, Myriad Immortal Alliance was forced to do that. With a flick of his finger, a plume of smoke sprayed out of the pearl, in which there were flickering images of lights and shadows. Wuxia recognized that it was the appearance of Ningbo City before it was destroyed. Wuxia gave a cold snort and straightened his back, frowning as he looked at the images, trying to figure out what Liu Bang was going to say. The images in the images changed. First, it showed Reverend Yao Yu and his family being transported into Ningbo City from outside the city. Then it showed 3 emissaries of Myriad Immortal Alliance entering the city. Then the images changed again, turning into a scene that looked down from the sky. Wuxia was leading dozens of military officers, chasing after dozens of fleeing heaven immortals. Then the images stopped abruptly. Liu Bang put away the pearl and said with a lazy smile, This is the evidence provided by Myriad Immortal Alliance. All the evidence shows that there is a reason for the destruction of Ningbo City in Hai Province, which is under Zhong Province's rule. If Hai Province had not sent an army to wipe out Mount Moon Gazing and abduct Reverend Yao Yu and his family, Myriad Immortal Alliance would not have had a head-on conflict with Hai Province. Shaking his head, Liu Bang glanced at Wuxia, who was sitting upright and staring at him. Myriad Immortal Alliance had sent emissaries to ask Hai Province to release Reverend Yao Yu and his family, but in the end, one of the 3 emissaries was killed on the spot. After that, Myriad Immortal Alliance sent dozens of fellow Taoists to persuade Hai Province to release them, but they were all killed by General Tanlang, the Grand Oracle of Hai Province's Directorate of Celestials. Slapping the table, Liu Bang cried out, This is shocking. Third young master, this is shocking. Hai Province's behavior has forced Myriad Immortal Alliance to not be too harsh. If the mighty Myriad Immortal Alliance can't even protect its own allies, the Alliance Master might as well buy a piece of tofu and kill himself. Wuxia opened his mouth and was about to scold Liu Bang. What Liu Bang had said, that was what had happened, but he had secretly changed a few words, so how did Hai Province become unreasonable? According to Liu Bang, it was perfectly justified for Myriad Immortal Alliance to destroy Ningbo City with a meteor strike. With a furious snort, Wuxia smashed the table in front of him with a palm and sprung to his feet. Chapter 6:12. When Wuxia jumped to his feet, Han Xian, who was sitting next to him and sipping on his wine vessel, suddenly glared at Wuxia and yelled, "How dare you? Sit down." Wuxia turned his head and glared at Han Xian, then ignored him. Han Xian threw down his wine vessel. Then his body suddenly exploded and transformed into a puff of dark mist, leaving behind dozens of afterimages and sealing off the void within a radius of 100 feet. Then he threw a punch towards Wuxia. Han Xian was also a body cultivator, and right after he threw out his punch, the void around Wuxia exploded into pieces. Countless space fragments, which were the real Chi-Chi, lined up into a sharp triangle, piercing towards Wuxia with a shrill tearing sound. Sneering, a large sheet of dark mist burst out from Wuqi's body. Instead of fighting against Han Xian head-on, he suddenly shot out a large sheet of green flame from both of his hands. As Wuxia flicked his fingertips, the flame transformed into 7 fist-sized green runes. Accompanied by a deep incantation, the 7 runes converged inward to form a small arrow that was around a foot in length and as thick as a thumb. The arrow then pierced through the air toward Han Xian's fist with an unpleasant whistling sound. A strong light flashed in the tent. Wuxia let out a muffled snort and took dozens of steps back. He was nearly thrown out of the tent by the punch. His armor was torn to shreds, and his battle robe was torn to shreds. His skin was densely covered with wounds that looked like the mouth of a child, many of which went straight to his bones, revealing Wuqi's bones, which had turned pale purple. Blood was dripping down from his wounds, and soon, a large pool was formed on the ground. There were 17 fist marks on Wuqi's chest and abdomen, and each of them had sunk 2 inches deep into his body. Just now, Han Xian had only thrown 1 punch, but in that instant, he had wounded Wuqi's chest and abdomen 17 vital points with his fist intent. A soft, bone-piercing, and highly corrosive immortal power was circulating rapidly inside Wuqi's body, destroying everything inside Wuqi's body. Sneering, Wuxia locked his hands into a strange incantation gesture. It was the extremely complicated Heaven and Earth Indestructible Seal, from the last chapter of the True Body of Heaven and Earth scripture. As the incantation gesture took shape, a dense purple mist quickly gathered from all directions and surged into Wuqi's body with a deep, muffled whistle. The countless wounds on his body healed rapidly, and so did the 17 fist marks on his chest. From his chest came the sound of bones rubbing against each other, which was the sound of the bones broken by Han Xian returning to their original positions and growing back. Coughing out a mouthful of extravasated blood, Wuxia, suddenly, Wuxia and Qi burst. On the other hand, Han Xian stood where he was with an extremely unsightly expression. He had thrown out his right fist just now, and now his right fist had turned into a tumor the size of a human head. Countless sarcomas and blood bubbles were constantly bursting out from the huge tumor. These sarcomas and blood bubbles were all shaped like human faces, and some of these faces were even grinding their teeth and letting out shrill, unpleasant ghost howls. The sarcomas and blood bubbles were still spreading along Han Xian's arm to his body. In the blink of an eye, these ugly, redundant things had extended to Han Xian's elbow. Amidst the popping and popping sounds, the sarcomas and blood bubbles on Han Xian's right fist kept rotting and exploding, and dark red pus splashed all over the ground. With each explosion, Han Xian's face turned paler. When these exploded sarcomas and blood bubbles extended to his elbow, Han Xian's face had turned as pale as a ghost. These sarcomas and blood bubbles were formed by devouring and absorbing Han Xian's blood and energy essence, and with each explosion, his energy would be consumed a little bit more. At present, these sarcomas and blood bubbles were only growing on the surface of his skin, but soon, these filthy things had spread to his bones. His bones, which had been tempered thousands of times and were stronger than diamonds, were now creaking from the corrosion. It seemed that his bones could not withstand this vicious attack any longer, and were about to disintegrate and rot as well. After laughing 3 times, a blood-red gleam flashed in Han Xian's eyes. He performed an incantation gesture with his left hand and pointed at his right arm. With a flash of blood-red immortal light, a stream of dark red blood sprayed out of his fist. The pungent blood fell to the ground, corroding a large pit about 10 feet in diameter on the floor paved with cloud brocade stones. There were no longer any new sarcomas or blood blisters on Han Xian's right arm, but the area below his right shoulder had become riddled with thumb-sized bloody holes, from which faint black smoke was constantly spewing out, cultivating both fleshly body and magic. This is very rare on Pangu continent. Han Xian looked at Wuqi with an indifferent expression and nodded slowly. The 9 decaying arrow, said Wuqi smilingly to Han Xian. I've just finished cultivating it not long ago, and you are the first to try it. It's very easy. Han Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Wuqi, sizing up Wuqi for a long time as if he had memorized every single hair on his body. Then he said coldly, if we meet on the battlefield in the future, I'll chop off your head and use it as a decoration. After sizing up Han Xian for a while, Wuqi said straightforwardly, there is nothing on you that I like. So, I'll just kill you and not collect any parts of you. Wuqi sneered in his mind. Han Xian wants to meet me on the battlefield? How could there be such a good thing? Just you wait and see. I'll soon send your longtime enemy to you. And then I'll see what else you can be so arrogant about. Han Xian did not say a word. He nodded to Bo Yenting, then sat back in his seat, picked up the wine pot, and began to drink by himself. It was as if he was not the one who had just scolded Wuqi and punched Wuqi. Bo Yenting's face turned extremely unsightly. Han Xian had scolded his subordinate in front of him, the chief commander, and even punched Wuqi. This was a complete disregard for Bo Yenting. Bo Yenting grabbed the wine pot and was about to throw it at Han Xian's head so that he could teach Han Xian a lesson himself. But then he saw Wuqi grinning coldly, strode into the tent, cupped his fist, and bowed to Bo Yenting. Bo Yenting clenched his fingers and left 5 fingerprints on the wine pot, then slowly put it down and said indifferently, what do you have to say, Tan Lang? As he asked Wuqi, Bo Yenting glanced at the large pit in the tent. The 9 corroding arrow was a very vicious curse among the secret curses of the human race, and it was very difficult for a talented oracle to master. Wuqi's cultivation base of the true body of heaven and earth scripture had reached the peak of the 9 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, but in just over a year after he obtained the cultivation technique of the Directorate of Celestials, he had mastered the vicious curse, the 9 corroding arrow. He was a cultivator of both fleshly body and magic at the same time, and he had a very good aptitude in curses. Talents were hard to come by, and Bo Yenting had the intention to recruit Wuqi. But Wuqi was now clearly a direct descendant of the Yu clan in Zhong province, and Bo Yenting still had to open up a lot of connections if he wanted to recruit Wuqi. But Bo Yenting was not in a hurry at all. As the 3rd son of Bo Zhongfu, few things in Zhong province could escape his notice, including the conflict between Wuqi and Yu Miao. Bo Yenting knew it all. With Yu Miao, that old fool, causing trouble, Bo Yenting felt that Wuqi was very likely to become a general under his command. With a warm smile on his face, Bo Yenting nodded and said, speak boldly. No matter what you say, whoever dares to touch a hair of yours will not be able to leave this tent today. A ferocious killing intent flashed across the corners of Bo Yenting's eyes, and all the military officers in the tent straightened their backs and looked at Liu Bang and the others with unfriendly eyes. That startled Liu Bang, and he cried out hurriedly, 3rd young master, this is a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding. Bo Yenting pointed a finger at Liu Bang and snapped, shut up. Liu Bang's face fell, and he shut his mouth aggrievedly. He leaned against Fan Kuai's thigh and squinted at Wuqi with a faint smile. Wuqi gave Liu Bang a look, then told him the cause and effect of High Province's annihilation of Mount Moon Gazing. He even testified that Reverend Yao Yu had threatened the officials of High Province, killed all the officials of High Province, and even tortured and killed the former military minister of High Province. It took Wuqi a quarter of an hour to explain that it was perfectly reasonable, and in line with Diyu's law for High Province to send an army to annihilate Mount Moon Gazing. In the end, Wuqi fired directly at Liu Bang, accusing Liu Bang of the so-called evidence provided by Myriad Immortal Alliance, which was completely forged with immortal magic and could not be used as evidence. Moreover, he accused Liu Bang, as an angel, of not being fair at all, and that he was unilaterally shielding those reckless immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance. In the end, Wuxia snapped. What an angel said is bullshit. If you use his forged evidence to force us to withdraw our troops, then we will be guilty to His Majesty the Human Emperor. First, we have let His Majesty down. Second, how can we face the hundreds of millions of people who died tragically in Hai Province? Hundreds of millions of people who died tragically in Hai Province. Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Bo Yunting almost spat out a mouthful of wine. Liu Bang jumped to his feet and roared angrily, "Bullshit! You are the one who is bullshitting. How many people do you have in Hai Province? How dare you talk nonsense in front of Lao Tzu? Ningbo City has only a little more than 1 million people. Where are you going to find hundreds of millions of people?" Liu Bang was a little angry. He did not expect Wu Qi to talk more nonsense than him. The seriousness of killing millions of people and hundreds of millions of people could not be compared at all. If millions of people were killed or injured, it could be brushed off with some offstage transactions. But if hundreds of millions of people were killed or injured, there would be no way to clean up the mess. Wu Qi gave Liu Bang a sideways glance with a sneer and said, "You have come to Penghu continent for more than a year, and you have been busy building palaces and looking for concubines. How could you be so familiar with the civil affairs of Diyu? Don't tell me you don't even know how many people there are in Hai Province?" Liu Bang was stunned. He blinked, then waved his hands and shouted, "Even if hundreds of millions of people are killed or injured in Hai Province, can the lives of ordinary people be compared to the lives of immortals? You have slaughtered hundreds of thousands of immortals and itinerant cultivators in Zhong Province, and it's time for you to stop, isn't it? A life for a life, a heaven immortal is at least worth 1 million people. You have killed so many people. That should be enough, right?" He took out a golden scroll from under his sleeve and put it heavily in front of Bo Yunting. Then he gave him a flattering smile and said, "Third young master, why don't we withdraw our troops and return to camp after signing this armistice agreement? Why do we have to fight to the death? TSK, I've given you 100 beauties, and all of them are virgins. Also, there are countless gold and silver, immortal stones and energy stones. Let's not fight this war, okay?" Looking at the flattering smile on Liu Bang's face, Bo Yunting slowly pressed his palm against the golden scroll. A loud rumble echoed out as the golden scroll, which was strengthened with immortal energy, shattered into pieces. Bo Yunting snapped. "What the celestial ambassador said is ridiculous. A total of 987,654,321 people died tragically in Ningbo City of Hai Province. Wait until I've killed so many immortals and itinerant cultivators. Then the celestial ambassador will come and mediate." Liu Bang stared blankly at Bo Yunting for a while, then suddenly sneered, pointed at Bo Yunting's nose and shouted, "Good. You have guts, boy." With a flick of his sleeve, Liu Bang spun angrily and walked away, followed by Fan Kuai and the others. Wu Qi frowned. Was Liu Bang really here to mediate the war? Why did it look more like an act? Chapter 613. The flying ship was wheeling in the sky. Hundreds of miles away, a city towering on a lofty mountain was engulfed in a monstrous flame. The city of Diyu was built with boulders as the main material, but the flame on it was the prime flame unleashed by the immortals, which could burn through even the void, let alone ordinary boulders. The pale golden flame silently blanketed everything. The boulders melted amidst the flame, and the magma gradually shrank, eventually turning into wisps of smoke and dissipating in the air. The city was littered with corpses, and the city itself was burned to ashes. A huge pit, hundreds of miles in diameter and several miles deep, had been burned out of the lofty mountain. Some residual magma had piled up in the pit, with bubbles the size of a human head bubbling. A few groups of expressionless people, numb like the walking dead, were walking away from the city along the main roads. They staggered across the boundless wilderness, some of them throwing their heads back and crying from time to time, but there were no tears in their eyes. The fire had evaporated more than half of the liquid in these survivors' bodies, so they had no tears left. From time to time, some of them fell silently to the ground, and a pale golden flame suddenly ignited on their bodies, burning them to ashes. The others turned a blind eye to these people and walked past them. Even their blood relatives didn't have the slightest reaction. There was only one thought in everyone's mind. Get away from this city, away from the hell where countless lives were killed. On the flying ship hovering high in the sky, Wuxia was kneeling on one knee on the bow, gasping for breath. There was a piercing wound on his right chest, with faint thunderbolts flashing in it. It was caused by a peak first-tier heaven immortal, who burned his immortal soul and sacrificed himself to a sword, becoming one with it and piercing through Wuxia's defensive barrier and bone armor. If not for his quick reflexes, which allowed him to forcibly rip open the void with his fleshly body, and flee about 10 feet away, the sword beam would have pierced through his heart. Even if it could not kill him, it would at least take away half of his life. As he tried his best to absorb the dense purple energy released from Panga continent to repair his body, the dozens of wounds on Wuxia's body gradually healed, but the wound on his chest healed at a very slow rate. Wave after wave of severe pain struck Wuxia, and he could not help but let out a muffled grunt. This battle was too bitter, too difficult. A total of 18 peak stage first-grade heaven immortals led 200 heaven immortals and 3,000 itinerant cultivators to attack Jianfeng City, the capital city of the Dark River Province, a fourth-grade province under the Central Province. All the military forces in Jianfeng City had been mobilized, and they followed Bo Yunting to wipe out all the itinerant cultivators in Zhong Province. Upon receiving the urgent military report that Jianfeng City was under attack, Wuxia, who was leading an army to besiege a gathering place of itinerant cultivators tens of thousands of miles away, immediately led 3,000 soldiers under his command to Jianfeng City. 18 peak stage first-grade heaven immortals. Although Wuxia was full of tricks, and he had killed 11 of them with sneak attacks, and the other 7 heaven immortals had joined forces, Wuxia was still in a very difficult situation. He had almost abandoned the army and fled several times. As he could not use any divine abilities, he could only use the true body of heaven and earth scripture to fight the enemy with his strong fleshly body, and the spells that he was not familiar with yet. Wuxia was in a very passive position. If it were not for his profound attainment in the true body of heaven and earth scripture, and the support of the body of the heavenly dragon cultivated by the dragon transformation script, Wuxia would have been smashed into a meat pie by those heaven immortals whose overall strength was about the same as his. Even so, the desperate blow from the heaven immortal, which had burned his immortal soul, nearly killed Wuxia. Fortunately, there were still 4 armies in the vicinity of Jianfeng City. A total of 20,000 soldiers rushed back to reinforce Wuxia, who was nearly beaten to death. That was how he managed to escape with his life. However, after the great battle, the 3,000 private guards of Yu clan under Wuxia's command were either killed or wounded, and only about 300 of them managed to escape with their lives. Most of them were crippled, and some of them even had their brains severely damaged. Even if they survived, they could only retire and retire. The 20,000 soldiers who rushed back in time also suffered heavy casualties. More than 27,000 of them were killed or wounded, and only less than 3,000 were still alive. The 4 generals who led the army had also been caught by the desperate enemies and exploded. The 4 generals and their subordinates were either wounded or killed. Now among the 5 armies, Wuxia was the only commander who could still move. Even though the 5 armies had risked their lives to fight these immortals and itinerant cultivators, a heaven immortal who cultivated a fire elemental cultivation technique still burned his immortal soul, and spewed out a mouthful of prime flame, burning the entire Jianfeng City to the ground. Jianfeng City originally had a population of more than 2 million, but less than 200,000 people managed to escape from the city. Coupled with the natural disasters such as astral winds and thunder during the battle, more than 100 villages and towns near Jianfeng City were completely destroyed, and more than 1 million people were killed or wounded. Damn it! Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Wuxia struggled to stand up and beckon to Huang Liang, whose chest, abdomen, and thigh had been stabbed 3 times by the immortal sword. Call those brothers who still have the strength to walk and go down there to save them. There must be people alive in the collapsed houses in the villages. As long as they are alive, we must save them. Huang Liang had just unbuttoned his pants and reached his hand into his crotch to feel around. When he heard Wu Qi's order, he grabbed his crotch hard and jumped up to tie his pants. With a yellow face, he smiled bitterly and said, "May the ancestors bless me, the ancestors bless me. That sword grazed past my pouch and hurt the hamstring of my thigh. Luckily, it didn't hurt my treasure. May the ancestors bless me, may the ancestors bless me." Hearing Huang Liang's words, Wu Qi nearly vomited blood. He roared furiously, "Take our brothers and go save them, or Lao Tzu will castrate you." Huang Liang let out a strange cry and hurriedly jumped up. Limping and limping, he led the over 2,000 soldiers who could still move and rushed to the villages and towns near Jianfeng City. With the strong physical strength of human warriors, even if the houses had collapsed with no more than 10 soldiers in a village, they could move all the collapsed houses away within 2 hours and rescue the people buried in them. Over 2,000 soldiers were more than enough to give emergency treatment to over 100 villages and towns. Sitting angrily on the prow of the ship, Wu Qi frowned and cursed Liu Bang and his brothers over and over again. Liu Bang, the angel, did not fulfill his duty as an angel at all. He ran around Diyu with a large group of squires. It had been more than 3 months since the day Wu Qi first met Liu Bang. Over the past 90 days, Liu Bang and his men had traveled to 18 provinces in Diyu, all of which were the capital cities of the provinces that had been destroyed. Almost exactly the same as when he was in Zhong province, Liu Bang forcibly took female immortals as concubines along the way. From 97 gathering places of itinerant cultivators in 18 provinces, he had forcibly taken 198 beautiful female immortals as concubines. However, his negotiations with the commander-in-chief of the provinces never yielded any results. Every time, he would show some so-called evidence provided by the myriad immortal alliance that the provinces had persecuted the immortals of the alliance, hoping to use it to persuade the provinces to withdraw their troops. But the evidence never stood up to scrutiny. Just like Wu Qi, the commander-in-chief of the provinces whose cities had been destroyed retorted to Liu Bang with harsh words. After a series of curses, Liu Bang flew into a rage out of humiliation and left with his men, without making any attempt to mediate or explain. Just like that, Liu Bang had traveled to 18 provinces over the past 3 months. However, the places he passed by were still plagued by the disasters of war. There was no relief at all. On the contrary, with Liu Bang's mediation efforts, the itinerant immortals of the provinces seemed to have taken stimulants and began to launch a large-scale counterattack in groups. The siege of Jianfeng City involved over 200 heaven immortals, including 20 peak-level heaven immortals. It was the first time in more than a year that Wu Qi had seen thousands of itinerant cultivators. Moreover, these itinerant cultivators and heaven immortals did not care about their lives. Whenever they fought with the soldiers led by Wu Qi, they would explode themselves at the first sign of exhaustion. At least half of Wu Qi's soldiers were killed by the sudden self-detonation of their opponents. In the face of such crazy enemies, even Wu Qi could only sigh helplessly. When the top heaven immortal who fought him realized that his immortal arts and magical treasures could do nothing to Wu Qi, he burned his immortal soul and launched a desperate attack on Wu Qi. Although his immortal soul was burned to ashes and he died, Wu Qi almost died together with him. It was not only Zhong province, but also the other provinces. Immortals and itinerant cultivators of various provinces were fighting desperately against Diyu's army, with all kinds of desperate means. In just a few months, as far as Wu Qi knew, the army of Zhong province had lost more than 500,000 soldiers. Forced into a desperate situation, Bo Zhongfu even ordered the old soldiers who had been discharged from the army and returned to the countryside to be recruited back into the army. Even the soldiers who served under Feng Lingling were re-enlisted, reorganized, and returned to the army after being reorganized. Liu Bang, are you here to put out the fire, or to set it on fire? Wu Qi frowned as he looked up at the clouds in the sky. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the recent changes in the situation had something to do with Liu Bang. Don't tell me you deliberately instigated Myriad Immortal Alliance to fight us just to make it easier for you to find a concubine? Wu Qi felt that Liu Bang was capable of doing such a thing. The fiercer the battle became, the more difficult it would be for those itinerant cultivator clans who had been cultivating in seclusion to come out and fight with others. If that happened, wouldn't all the beautiful female immortals in those clans be exposed? While he was cursing what Liu Bang had done in his mind, Wuxia suddenly heard a crisp sound of metal clashing. The sound was crisp and pleasant, but it came with a strange force that went straight into one's internal organs. Upon hearing it, Wuxia felt his divine soul tremble, as if a force was about to pour into his head. Hastily, Wuxia performed an incantation gesture, enveloping his entire body with a layer of gray mist, and only then did he stop the invasion of the force. Rising to his feet, Wuxia looked into the distance. Hundreds of miles away, he saw a group of monks clad in kasayas and holding staffs in their hands, standing next to the crowds of people fleeing Jianfeng City. Each and every one of these monks was tall, dignified, and there was a faint glow of Buddha behind their heads. The suffering of the mortal world, the sorrow of all living beings. Join my Buddhist sect, all will be liberated. These monks murmured some words to persuade people to join the Buddhist sect. Gradually, those people who had survived the calamity knelt down to these monks and threw themselves on the ground. Wuqi's heart suddenly twitched. In just a short period of time to drink a cup of tea, hundreds of thousands of people had knelt down in the wilderness. From these people, a huge amount of faith power soared into the sky and constantly poured into the bodies of these monks. Chapter 6:14. Buddhist League cultivators had a high demand for the power of faith. Whether it was condensing relics or forming indestructible bodies, the power of faith was an extremely important resource. How could Buddhist League cultivators preach on Penghu continent with such great fanfare? But when the all-out war broke out, the attention of the Yu dynasty was attracted by myriad immortal alliance, those immortals, and itinerant cultivators. Naturally, no one paid attention to what the Buddhist League cultivators were doing. For a moment, hundreds of thousands of people fell to their knees, chanting the name of Buddha as the Buddhist League cultivators did. A great amount of pure power of faith poured out of their bodies and poured into the bodies of the Buddhist League cultivators. Gradually, the Buddhist light behind the heads of the Buddhist League cultivators became more condensed. After being transformed by their Dharma, the power of faith was transformed into extremely pure Buddhist energy. About 70% of the Buddhist energy remained in the bodies of the Buddhist League cultivators, while the other 30% transformed into golden beams invisible to the naked eye and rose into the sky, quickly disappearing. What a brilliant plan! Wuqi sneered. It was indeed a brilliant plan. The officials of the Yu dynasty were a little dull, and their reactions were a little slow in the face of such a clever plan. The Yu dynasty was involved in the situation, while Wuqi had always been an outsider. Therefore he could see things more clearly than those officials. A faintly discernible aroma came along with the faint chanting of Sanskrit. A clear spring swayed around Iju, and a few lotus leaves grew out from the spring. 3 pink lotuses bloomed quietly, and a human silhouette shrouded in a faint pink light quietly appeared on the lotuses. The fat monk frowned at Wuqi with a strange expression on his face. After a moment of silence, the fat monk chanted the name of Buddha and said in a deep and powerful voice, "I am Iju, the preaching disciple of Little Rui Delightful Buddha of Carefree Heavenly Realm. This general has killed my junior brother today, which has sowed karma with Little Rui Delightful Heavenly Realm. If you are willing to bow your head and convert to Buddhism, that will be fine. Otherwise, you will be punished by heaven." Therefore, it was better to take advantage of this germination to strangle it when it had just appeared, lest these Buddhist cultivators develop the power of their believers to a point where they couldn't get rid of them in the future. Currently, the union of 10,000 immortals, as well as other immortals and itinerant cultivators, were engaged in a fierce battle with the Yu dynasty. The flames of war were endless, and the people had no way of making a living. Yet the Buddhist cultivators actually came out. Wuqi felt that there was definitely something fishy going on here. Opening his chaotic divine eyes, Wuqi sneered coldly as he looked at the power of faith rising in the air. When the myriad immortal alliance launched a desperate attack on the Yu dynasty, the Yu government immediately made the strongest counterattack. The battle between the two sides involved those immortals and itinerant cultivators who were living in seclusion. As a result, the dispute between the myriad immortal alliance and the Diyu dynasty immediately evolved into an all-out war between the immortal powers on Pangu continent and the Diyu dynasty. When the war caused countless people to lose their homes, the Buddhist cultivators took advantage of the situation and used their tongues to bewitch the people into becoming Buddhist believers. Buddhist cultivators. The blood soul immortal stunning bow was also one of the mystic arts of the Diyu dynasty's Directorate of Celestials. It used the user's own blood essence to conjure a vicious restrictive spell, which specialized in attacking cultivators' souls and souls. It had the powerful effect of defiling one's soul and corroding one's golden body, and was extremely lethal to both immortals and arhats. Wuxia had spent more than a year fighting outside, and during his free time, he had studied many of the mystic arts of the Directorate of Celestials. Therefore, it was easy for him to conjure such a vicious curse, which was extremely powerful. Wuxia shook his head. Karma? Convert? Otherwise it would be the wrath of heaven? These words could only fool those mortals. How could Wuxia be frightened by them? Laughing mockingly, Wuxia cried out in a deep voice, "Wrath of heaven? Can you represent the heaven? How dare you?" Wuxia grinned, then led the dozen flying ships under his command and sped toward the plain. A shrill howl rang out as the monk's Dharma body quickly turned green, shriveling and shriveling. His skin and flesh were rotting in many places, and a large amount of pus was oozing out of his body. In just a few breaths of time, the dignified monk had lost all his skin and flesh, turning into a pale green skeleton. A beam of light towered into the sky from the green smoke. The monk's Sarira tried to flee, but a few wisps of green smoke wrapped around it. A miserable howl rang out, and the Sarira abruptly turned green. As the wind blew, the fist-sized Sarira suddenly turned into dust and fell to the ground. Wuxia's stand was very firm. He knew very well the bewitching power of religion over the people. He did not want the Buddhist League to establish a foundation in Zhong province, and he did not want them to take the opportunity to enter Hai province and his territory. When all the people in his territory became believers of the Buddhist League, who would listen to whom? What if all the soldiers in his army in Hai province were believers of the Buddhist League? Would the army listen to him or the cultivators of the Buddhist League? Was there an eminent Buddhist League overseeing this place? Wuxia immediately put his guard up. The monks walked among the people who knelt on the ground, chanting the name of Buddha, while a faint golden Buddhist light sprinkled from their bodies. Wherever the Buddhist light passed, the wounds on the people's bodies healed quickly, and their exhausted physical strength was quickly replenished. The sadness, grief, confusion, and numbness in their hearts gradually calmed down. There was only warmth and peace in their hearts, as if they had come to the paradise of bliss, where they would never have to go through the cycle of reincarnation again. Wuxia frowned deeply as he looked at these monks, who were clad in kasayas and holding staffs in their hands, looking solemn and dignified. He had dealt with a group of monks, including Arhat Baosheng. These monks were people who would not get up without benefits, and their Taoist rites were located in outer heavenly realms. Like those immortals, the cultivators of the Buddhist League had been forcefully suppressed by Diyu dynasty on Pangu continent. Wuxia's face furrowed abruptly. Was this the so-called eminent Buddhist League? Monkey Zhu was so angry that his white flesh was trembling. He pointed a finger at Wuxia and roared furiously, then suddenly raised a hand toward the sky. A beam of golden light towered into the sky and exploded into a golden rain of light about 100 miles in diameter, forming a huge swastika. Laughing hideously, Monkey Zhu said, "What a ferocious vile creature! It just so happens that an eminent senior of our sect is overseeing this place. Let him purge your foolish fools. Why are you in such a hurry to summon me, Zhu?" A very pretentious voice rang out. Wuxia took a heavy step forward and unleashed an oppressive aura, causing Zhu and the cultivators of the Buddhist League behind him to drift back hundreds of feet. "Cut the nonsense!" Wuxia snapped. "Tell your fellow bald donkeys to get the hell out of Zhong province, or else you'll suffer the same fate as that bald donkey just now. With that ugly face and head full of scars, who else could it be but Lao Ai's precious disciple, Madman Shui?" Wuxia sucked in a cold breath as he vaguely sensed something. Wu Qi felt a vast, mysterious, and frightening force covering the entire sky above Pangu continent. He glanced around with his chaotic divine eyes, and a faint auspicious light spread out in all directions. In a flash, he could see all the changes in the aura within a radius of 10 billion miles. Not only around Jianfeng City, but in other places very far away. There were similar golden auspicious lights towering into the sky. Judging by the number of auspicious lights, there were at least hundreds of thousands of cultivators of the Buddhist League recruiting believers on the battlefield between human and immortal. Wu Qi gave a cold snort and cried out in a deep voice, "Huangliang, activate all flying ships' defensive mechanisms and prepare for battle." Instead of saying that Liu Bang was trying to extinguish the flames of war, it was better to say that he was fooling people. By assuming a posture of wholeheartedly mediating disputes, he could even anesthetize many people in the Yu dynasty, drawing all their attention to him and the celestial court he represented. Wu Qi looked coldly at the huge group of cultivators and said, "Leave the territory of Zhong province. I don't care what strange plans you Buddhist League have in other places, but not in Zhong province. You want to develop believers in Zhong province? Dream on. Damn you." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi suddenly stretched out his hands and made a posture of drawing a bow and shooting an arrow. The misty green gas condensed into a bow and a long arrow in his palm. He chanted a few spells in a low voice, and a trace of blood oozed out from the corner of his eyes. The blood flowed into the arrow like a living thing, and a strange magic talisman that looked like a big eye was drawn on the arrowhead. When the cultivators of the Buddhist League saw their fellow disciple killed by an arrow, they all chanted the name of Buddha and flew into the sky angrily. Both sides bumped into each other in midair. A fat monk, standing over 10 feet tall, with a fair and plump face, pointed his finger at Wu Qi and snapped furiously, "How dare you? Why did you hurt my junior brother with such a vicious curse?" Especially when Wu Qi was planning to bring Yan Dan and others to Pangu continent. There were too many unspeakable things in his territory in the future. If the Buddhist League established a foundation in Zhong province, it would be like he suddenly had countless spying eyes around him, and it would be difficult for him to keep any secrets. With a long cry, he thrust his right hand forward, and the arrow shot out silently with a trail of green smoke that was over 300 feet long. Hundreds of miles away, a smiling monk was touching the head of a severely injured elderly man, injecting his power into his body and healing him. Suddenly, an arrow pierced into his chest. Along with a series of hissing noises, the monk's face paled immediately. The green arrow exploded in his chest and transformed into thin streams of green smoke, coiling around his body and wrapping him up. Huangliang and a few generals stood behind Wu Qi, guarding him with bone talismans in their hands. They were ready to strike at any time. They also looked at the monks in confusion. They could not understand why Wu Qi suddenly attacked them. At least in Huangliang's opinion, these monks were helping to appease the common people, so he should save as many people as he could. Chapter 6:15. He was clad in a moon-white monk robe on the inside, and a golden kasaya on the outside. A fist-sized 7-colored glazed Buddhist bead was hanging around his neck, while a string of pink prayer beads made of unknown material was dangling from his left hand. Madman Xue was standing on a lotus flower, putting on a solemn and dignified face of an eminent monk, looking up at the sky with his eyes facing the sky. However, no matter how one looked at him, he would not look like a crown prince even if he was wearing a dragon robe. Madman Xue's attire made him look like a nouveau riche from the Buddhist League. Especially the rouge stain on his cheek that had yet to be wiped off. It was a clear indication that he was a nouveau riche from the Buddhist League. But when Iju saw Madman Xue, he looked like a grandson who had just met his grandfather. With a flattering smile on his face, he bowed and came before Madman Xue, then said in a low voice, "I really deserve to die for troubling you, Venerable One. It's just that when I came here with a few junior brothers to preach the Tao, we bumped into this rude and unreasonable man, who asked us to leave Zhong province. Both of my junior brothers were brutally killed by him." Madman Xue answered in an ostentatious manner, then fixed his eyes on Wu Qi. Wu Qi looked at Madman Xue with a faint smile on his face. Upon seeing Wu Qi, Madman Shui immediately trembled with fear. He glared at Iju with both shock and anger, and was about to lose his temper, but Wuqi had already stepped out of the flying ship. Where did this evil monk come from? How dare you come here to seek death? Take this punch from me. Wuqi winked at Madman Shui as he threw a punch at Madman Shui. Madman Shui gave a loud cry as countless pink lotus petals shot out from all over his body. He clasped his palms together, and a beam of great delight Zen light transformed into a dense mist and shot out, colliding head-on with Wuqi's punch. Although Wuqi's punch looked strong and powerful, it actually did not contain any strength at all. The beam of Madman Shui's great delight Zen light only produced a few faint ripples. How dare you act presumptuously in front of me with such a puny trick? Madman Shui laughed wildly, then pointed his fingers at Wuqi. Amidst a series of sizzling noises, tens of thumb-sized thunderbolts darted out, glowing with a pale pink light and glowing with a pale golden Buddhist light. The thunderbolts exploded on Wuqi's body, and the sound of each thunderbolt explosion was the moaning sound of a young girl reaching the climax. The power of the thunderbolts was not great, but the moaning sound had an extremely strange and magical power that could shake one's soul. Wuqi frowned slightly. The moaning had no effect on him. However, the faces of the Buddhist cultivators, including Monk Iju, were all flushed, and their lower bodies suddenly propped up a tall little tent. Wuqi cursed under his breath that Loony Blood's thunder technique was really absurd and obscene. Then he gave Loony Blood a quick glance, and both of them flew towards the ruins of Jianfeng City, which had turned into a lake of lava. When they had flown tens of miles away, Wuqi turned his head and bellowed, "Kill all these baldies for Lao Tzu." Huang Liang was now Wuqi's most loyal lackey. Wuqi had fed him with countless money and beautiful girls, and had even intimidated him with his frightening overall strength. Upon hearing Wuqi's order, Huang Liang did not hesitate. He immediately waved his arm and cried out, "Attack!" Hundreds of oracles standing on the deck of the flying ship raised their arms at the same time, unleashing countless bone arrows that shot towards Iju and his companions. Gleaming with a cold gleam, the bone arrows were as sharp as the fangs of a wolf. The pungent smell of the black smoke assailed the nostrils, and shrill ghost howls could be heard coming out of the black smoke. Obviously, these were not some kind of attack. Some oracles even activated the power of earth, fire, wind and thunder, filling the sky with strong gales, thunders and flames, while large meteors fell whistling down from the sky, smashing towards the monks. Amidst the rain of arrows and gales, there were also arrows shot by the soldiers led by Wuqi. The arrows shot by these specially made crossbows were very powerful, and when the cultivators around Iju were caught off guard, 7 or 8 of them were injured on the spot. Dark green blood gushed out from their wounds. All the arrows were coated with a deadly poison, a poison that even the golden body of Arhut of the Buddhist League with the cultivation base of heaven immortals could not resist. Iju was so angry that his white flesh was shivering. Glancing at Loony Blood, who was fighting further and further away from Wuqi, he clenched his teeth and bellowed, "Junior brothers, let's release these vile creatures from purgatory. Damn it. I thought we got ourselves a good job this time, but why do we have to risk our lives?" With a shake of his staff, Iju unleashed a large sheet of golden Buddhist light to protect himself, and then unleashed all sorts of Buddhist spells like a thunderstorm. The soldiers sent by Wuqi to rescue the people buried under the collapsed houses had also returned. When they saw Iju and the group of monks fighting against a dozen flying ships, they immediately formed into a battle formation and charged forward with deafening battle cries. Immediately, the oracles on the flying ships waved their arms and recited incantations, sprinkling a large sheet of light onto the soldiers and greatly enhancing their combative strength. While the two groups of people were engaged in a fierce battle, Wuqi had brought Loony Blood to the ruins of Jianfeng City, several hundred miles away. Hiding in a cave melted by the true flame of an immortal, Wuqi grabbed Loony Blood's bald head and gave it a hard smack. "TSK, you and your disciple have climbed up the high branch of a primordial immortal, and yet you didn't even send me a message? Humph. Since when did you become the Lord of the Merry Buddha of Wishful Heaven Realm? What kind of trick are you playing?" Loony Blood stared at Wuqi with a distressed face. His bald head was covered with bumps from Wuqi's smack. Holding his head with both hands, he cried out, "Don't hit me! Don't hit me! I'll tell you everything!" Only after Loony Blood told Wuxia what he and Lao AI had been doing for the past 1 year did Wuxia understand what he and Lao AI had been doing for the past year. It all started from the incident of Miaoing Palace. In the case of Miaoing Palace, Wuxia had gained a great advantage, as he had successfully obtained the innate yang energy and cultivated an innate chaotic spirit body, while Feng Lingling was the one who had fallen into Wuxia's trap. He had discovered the collusion between King Baishan, King Zhangqiu, and Patriarch Miaoing. But, not only did he not contribute to the case, he was pressured by both King Baishan and Patriarch Miaoing. One of them worked hard in the imperial court of Du, while the other used her identity as a celestial lord in the celestial court to force Feng Lingling into a desperate situation. After forcing Feng Lingling to retreat from Zhongning City, Lao AI returned to Miaoing Palace in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean, and hooked up with goddess Miao Xian. As the proud disciple of Lao AI, Madman Shui had hooked up with several dozens of junior disciples of Miaoing Palace, using the primordial yin energy of these female immortals to strengthen his own cultivation base. Lao AI's great sun magic was truly evil and magical, as it allowed Madman Shui to advance his cultivation base to the realm of heaven immortal in just a few short months. On the other hand, Lao AI had been cultivating day and night with goddess Miao Xian. As goddess Miao Xian possessed the cultivation base of a gold immortal, just a little bit of her energy essence to Lao AI would be equal to the hard work of an ordinary heaven immortal for thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. On the other hand, Lao AI's cultivation base was advancing at a tremendous pace, and in just a few months, he had reached the level of a high-tier heaven immortal. The master and disciple had regarded Miaoing Palace as a paradise, and just when they were indulging themselves in the pleasures, the elders of Myriad Immortal Alliance, a celestial lord from the celestial court, Buddha Wishful Joy, and some other important figures suddenly paid them a visit. After a closed-door discussion with these people, Patriarch Miaoing appointed goddess Miao Xian to lead a group of disciples to cooperate with Myriad Immortal Alliance and Buddha Wishful Joy. Lao AI and Madman Shui were cultivating the great sun magic, while Lao AI was also cultivating the delightful Zen technique of the Buddhist League. And his prime magical treasure was the Wheel of Delight, an evil Buddhist treasure. Although Buddha Wishful Joy only stayed in Miaoing Palace for a few hours, he took a liking to Lao AI at first glance. With just a few words from Patriarch Miaoing, he took Lao AI as his personal disciple, and taught him the unfathomable delightful Zen technique of the Buddhist League. With that, Madman Shui's status rose, and he became the Dharma imparter under Buddha Wishful Joy's direct disciple, which gave him a very high position in minor Rui-free heaven realm. Because of Lao AI and Madman Shui's extraordinary innate talent, both of them were the magical creatures of the Nine Dragons Jade Pillar. Buddha Wishful Joy was very pleased with them, and he personally taught them their cultivation base, using the divine ability to enlighten them and elevate their cultivation base to the level of peak stage heaven immortal. Wuqi's mouth twitched when he heard that. It was not easy for him to cultivate his true body of heaven and earth scripture to the level of peak stage first-tier heaven immortal, but Lao AI and Madman Shui had obtained such great benefits just by changing their cultivation bases. But Buddha Wishful Joy was a mighty Buddha, whose overall strength was equivalent to that of a primordial immortal from the celestial court. It was really easy for him to create two heaven immortals. Wuqi gave Madman Shui a fierce glare and said with a cold snort, "What are you trying to do?" Knowing that Wuqi had something on his master, Madman Shui dared not to hide anything, and quickly told Wuqi what was going on behind Myriad Immortal Alliance. As Wuqi had expected, the nearly insane and destructive attack launched by Myriad Immortal Alliance was an attempt to stir up the flames of war between the Yu dynasty and the immortals on Pangu continent. They wanted to make the people on Pangu continent homeless and destitute, making it easier for the Buddhist League to preach and recruit new believers. But the expansion of Buddhist League's believers on Pangu continent was only a part of the whole plan. Myriad Immortal Alliance was just a chess piece in someone's hand, and what they were doing was only to trigger a conflict. Even the Myriad Immortal Alliance had found a perfect excuse in advance for launching such a crazy attack on Du province. The sovereign was ambushed and seriously wounded by a king from the imperial clan of Yu dynasty, as well as a dozen elders of the alliance. It was one thing to seriously injure those elders, but the sovereign's real identity was the nephew of some almighty figure in the heaven. Now that he was seriously injured, and they could not find any spirit medicine that could heal him, he could die at any time. As the nephew of an important official of the celestial court, an existence as strong as a primordial immortal, once such a vital figure died, the consequences would be extremely serious. Logically speaking, Myriad Immortal Alliance was in the right, and their attack on Yu dynasty was justified. Even the fact that they had attacked Ningbo City and over 200 other provinces with stars was justified, because they had provided all kinds of evidence. On the other hand, the celestial ambassador Liu Bang was not in Liangzhu to discuss the matter with the human emperor. Instead, he was deliberately traveling to various provinces, trying to mediate the war. He was determined to make the war as fierce as possible. On top of that, he wanted Yu dynasty to gain the absolute upper hand, and make the immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent suffer as much as possible. Wuxia looked at Madman Shui in horror and said, "Are they crazy? Are they intentionally sending these immortals and itinerant cultivators to their deaths?" Madman Shui rolled his eyes and said to Wuxia with a wry smile, "Who said these immortals are dead?" Wuqi's heart skipped a beat as he grabbed Madman Shui's shoulder. Chapter 6:16. Those immortals were not really dead? The corner of Wuqi's eyes twitched as he stared at Madman Shui. Vaguely, he felt as if there was a blood-red curtain in front of him, and something extremely terrible was hiding behind it. Madman Shui's words were like a huge hand that pulled the curtain open. Wuxia felt that he had seen through something. Patriarch Miaoing was crafting a primordial immortal item under the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. King Baishan and King Zhongqiu were inextricably linked to Miaoing Palace. The celestial lords of the Celestial Court, and the Buddhas of the Buddhist League, had suddenly paid a visit to Miaoing Palace. The sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance was the nephew of some almighty figure of the Celestial Court, and the alliance had been working hard to gather all the itinerant immortals and cultivators on Pangu continent, using various means to gradually form them into an organization with powerful potential power. Since the sovereign was suddenly wounded by a king from the imperial clan of Yu dynasty, it was only logical that the alliance would retaliate against Yu dynasty. On the other hand, the attack on itinerant cultivators in Yu province had given the alliance the best excuse to retaliate. It was not only the matter of the sovereign, but also related to the life and death of countless immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent. Even Wuqia found it funny. Didn't the ministers of Yu dynasty find it strange? After those mountain spirits and water demons absorbed the essence of heaven and earth, they naturally gained sentience and cultivated into demons, as it was permitted by the law of heaven and earth. How did so many immortals and itinerant cultivators come to Pangu continent? Where did they get their cultivation technique manuals from? Wasn't there someone pushing this matter from behind the scenes? Like Supremacy 3 Flame, a good friend of Wuqi's, who was born as a butcher, he could actually find a mystic scripture that could lead him straight to the heaven immortals Tao in a barren mountain. Was it because of his good luck? Or was it because of his ancestral grave? On top of that, the mystic scripture happened to suit Supremacy 3 Flame spirit root, allowing him to cultivate a fire elemental cultivation technique until he reached the heaven immortal realm. Fortunately, there was an organization like the Myriad Immortal Alliance, which gradually gathered the idle immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent and brought them together. Even when Wuqia once assumed the name of Taoist greed and made a name for himself in Anhe City, an emissary from Myriad Immortal Alliance immediately came to him and asked him to join the alliance. This was a whole set of plans, a whole set of extremely detailed plans. Taking a deep breath, Wuqia asked in a deep voice, "How do you know those immortals who died fighting Yu's army are still alive?" Madman Shui twitched his lips as he stared at Wuqia and said, "Only after I joined the Buddhist League with my master did I realize the vastness of the Buddhist League, and its divine abilities are truly boundless. Firstly, half of the 9 Nether Yellow Springs' 6 paths of reincarnation was already under the control of Buddhism. Secondly, the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, has an innate extraordinary treasure that was created when the heaven and earth were first created, the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne. It can transform into a transmigration pool of virtues, and as long as a single thread of true spirit is left in it, one will be immortal. Madman Shui smacked his lips enviously and said mysteriously, as long as a single thread of true spirit is placed in the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne in advance, even if one's body is killed and soul is destroyed, as long as the true spirit remains, after the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne is transformed into a transmigration pool of virtues, it will only take a huge amount of Buddhist willpower to reforge one's golden body, or transform into an arhat, or even a bodhisattva. If one makes a great contribution to the Buddhist League, it is not impossible for one to transform into a Buddha directly. Staring fixedly at Madman Shui, Wuxia clenched his jaws and said, all those immortals and itinerant cultivators who fought against us crazily over the past few days, have their true spirits been placed in the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne? Madman Shui gave Wuxia a strange look and said with a wry smile, tell me, if not for the fact that they have a thread of true spirit in the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne, which gives them no fear of death, and promises them great benefits after the battle, who would be so foolish to fight against the army of the Yu dynasty? Myriad Immortal Alliance is just a loose alliance of immortals, and they are not the sons of the sovereign. So, why would they fight so desperately? According to Madman Shui, almost all the immortals and itinerant cultivators of Myriad Immortal Alliance, as long as they took part in the battle against the Yu dynasty, had placed a thread of true spirit in the 8 Treasures Lotus Throne in advance. The reason why those immortals and itinerant cultivators who took part in the battle were even crazier and more fanatical than the immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance was because the Buddhist League had given them an extra promise. If those immortals who had attained the righteous fruit of heaven immortal perished, they would directly form their arhat golden body in the transmigration pool of virtue, and the power they obtained would definitely be greater than their original strength. If they contributed a certain amount of meritorious service, such as destroying Jianfeng City and killing those immortals who killed and wounded the Great Yu army, they might directly obtain the Buddhahood of Bodhisattva, possessing the overall strength equivalent to that of a gold immortal. Buddhist cultivators did not attach great importance to the improvement of their cultivation base, but to the accumulation of the power of faith, as well as the sudden epiphany. Therefore, there was a saying in the Buddhist League that one could become a Buddha with a single thought. As long as one could comprehend some unique power from the Buddhist scriptures, even an ordinary mortal could become a Buddha in an instant. With the overall strength of the Buddhas, as long as they did not hesitate to spend a great amount of power of faith, they could definitely fulfill the promise they made to those immortals and itinerant cultivators. They themselves were only heaven immortals, and perhaps they would never be able to become gold immortals. However, as long as they joined the union of myriad immortals in attacking Diyu, risking their lives to destroy some villages and cities, and killing a few of Diyu's soldiers, perhaps when they condensed their golden body in the transmigration pool of virtue, they would have the power of a bodhisattva. They could either be a powerless little heaven immortal for the rest of their lives, or achieve the Buddhahood of Bodhisattva in the Buddhist League, which would at least allow them to control a small heavenly realm. Comparing the two, Wuxia could easily guess the choice of those immortals and itinerant cultivators. The promise the Buddhist League made to those itinerant cultivators was that even if they did not have good aptitude in this life, it would be difficult for them to become heaven immortals. However, since the Buddhist League controlled half of the 6 paths of reincarnation in the Yellow Springs, they could influence the reincarnation of these itinerant cultivators. After these rogue cultivators died, the Buddha Lord would use the power of the merit reincarnation pawn to help these rogue cultivators repair their souls. Then he would send them to be reincarnated so that they could enjoy glory and wealth, and at the same time, they would have excellent cultivation aptitude. The Buddhist League promised that after these itinerant cultivators enjoyed everything they had, they would send disciples to bring them into the Buddhist League and do their best to cultivate them. At the very least, they would become arhats. An arhat of the Buddhist League would at least be able to control a populated planet in a small heavenly realm, which was better than being an itinerant cultivator with the lowest status on Pangu continent. With the promise of the Buddhist League and such generous conditions, Myriad Immortal Alliance and those itinerant immortals and itinerant cultivators had caused such heavy losses to Du. When these cultivators did not even care about their lives, how many lives would it take for Du's soldiers to fight them to the death? Wuxia sucked in a cold breath. Who made this plan? How could it be so vicious and decisive? And what exactly was the purpose of this plan? Overall, Myriad Immortal Alliance was a complete loser in this plan. The sovereign was seriously wounded, and his life was in danger. A dozen elders were severely wounded, and it was unknown if they could recover. Most of the immortals and itinerant cultivators had accepted the conditions of the Buddhist League, and once they died, they would become disciples of the Buddhist League. None of this would benefit Myriad Immortal Alliance. What exactly were they trying to do? Madman Shui could not answer Wuqi's question. He and Lao Ai were just disciples of Delightful Buddha, and they had just joined the sect. Although they had been ordered to bring many cultivators of the Buddhist League to Pangu continent to stir up trouble, he had not been able to get close to the real core circle of the Buddhist League, and could not figure out the purpose of all this. In general, in the end, only the Buddhist League had received the greatest benefit. How many allies did Myriad Immortal Alliance have on Pangu continent? Each province might have only a few thousand or even tens of thousands of immortals and itinerant cultivators, but under the rule of Du, there were tens of thousands of first-grade provinces, and each of them had 300 provinces. So the total number of immortals owned by Myriad Immortal Alliance was truly a terrifying number. If so many immortals and itinerant cultivators joined the Buddhist League, its overall strength would definitely be greatly improved. And in the process, the Buddhist League would be able to constantly recruit those displaced people. For Buddhist League cultivators, natural treasures, spirit herbs, and immortal stones were important, but the foundation of their cultivation lay in the number of believers. For those high-level cultivators, such as bodhisattvas and Buddhas, the more stable their foundation would be, and the stronger their overall strength would be. It was equivalent to Myriad Immortal Alliance fighting for their lives, and all the benefits would be taken away by the Buddhist League. But Wuxia did not believe that Myriad Immortal Alliance was such a self-sacrificing existence. Just by looking at the style of Li Qinghua, the son of the sovereign, he knew that Myriad Immortal Alliance was not a charity organization. So, what exactly was the Myriad Immortal Alliance trying to do? Why did they involve Patriarch Miaoying, and even the high-ranking officials of the Celestial Court? And it seemed that Liu Bang, the Celestial Ambassador appointed by the Celestial Emperor, was also involved in this? What exactly were they trying to do? Patting Madman Shui's bald head, Wuqia said in a deep voice, "Go back and tell your master about this." Madman Shui grinned, nodded, and said, "Master said that we should just follow behind and take advantage of the situation." Twitching his lips contemptuously, Madman Shui said in a gloomy voice, "We know these baldies are plotting something, but what does that have to do with us? If we don't take the benefits, we will lose our lifespan." Clapping his hands happily, Wuqia laughed and said, "Isn't that the truth?" After a brief moment of pondering, Wuqia whispered a few words to Madman Shui. After that, both men exchanged a glance and nodded at the same time. Wuqia punched Madman Shui on the shoulder and shattered his shoulder blade. Meanwhile, Madman Shui pulled out a Muni pearl given to him by Buddha of Joy before he left, and hit Wuqi's face with it. The impact caused Wuqi's face to cave in and nearly disfigure his face. Both men sprung up into the air with their wounds, cursing and swearing as they ran back to the flying ship. This time, it was Wuqia who was running in the front. Madman Shui produced the Muni pearl given to him by Buddha and smashed Wuqia with it. The pearls smashed onto Wuqi's body like raindrops, making all the bones in Wuqi's body produce cracking noises, while his arms and legs were broken and tendons torn. It was a miserable sight. As soon as Wuqia returned to the flying ship, he immediately ordered the army to retreat. When Huang Liang and the others saw that Wuqia was defeated, they quickly turned the ship around and fled. Madman Shui laughed and ordered Yizhu and the others not to chase after them, while he continued to recruit refugees and expand his believers. Wuqia fled for several tens of thousands of miles. Just as he was about to find a place to rest, an emergency message suddenly came from the voice-transmitting formation on the flying ship. Angel Liu Bang was assassinated in Huangsha Province, severely wounded and dying. The assassin was Jing Mo, the left military minister of Huangsha Province. Chapter 617. This lad is really ruthless. Touching the wound on his face, Wuxia gasped in pain. A few days ago, Wuxia and Madman Shui had put on a good show. Madman Shui had used the Muni Pearl to break all of Wuqi's tendons and bones, forcing him to flee with his army. The news had spread across Zhong Province. After Wuxia reported the incident to Bo Yunting in an official document, he returned to Hai Province with several dozens of his personal guards to recuperate, while the soldiers under his command continued to fight under the leadership of the generals sent by Yu clan. The Muni Pearl was a Buddhist magical artifact. It was crafted by eminent Buddhists by fusing their own Buddhist energy with the willpower of all people, and using all kinds of pearls naturally produced by the heaven and earth as their main body. It had the powerful ability to destroy all fabrications and wipe out all evil spirits. The Muni Pearl in Madman Shui's hand was crafted by Buddha Wishful Joy, and its power was extraordinary. Even a gold immortal would have his flesh and bones shattered by a single pearl. It was a very powerful magical artifact. Even though Wuqi had a very strong fleshly body, he was still severely injured after being struck by the Muni Pearl a few times. His face was also hit by a pearl, and the bridge of his nose was dented. His injuries were even more serious. A thread of Buddhist energy lingered in his wounds, tangling with them. Even if he took some spirit pills and medicines, it would be difficult for him to fully recover. Fortunately, Wuqi had Princess Zhongli by his side, who had inherited the great Tao of the ancient heaven god. Princess Zhongli had exercised the power of heaven and earth to neutralize 99% of the Buddhist energy that had invaded Wuqi's body, and only then did Wuqi's injuries heal by more than half. However, the face was fragile and delicate. Although most of his injuries had healed, the wound on his face still made Wuqi feel very uncomfortable. There were still some cracks on his cheekbones, and even when he breathed, Wuqi felt a sharp pain in his head. Staring at a clear spring amidst the vast expanse of yellow sand, he gave his own face a glance, took a deep breath, and with a sway of his body, he sped forward. This was no longer the central province, but the Yellow Sand Province, which was more than 100 provinces away from the central province. This was also the place where the angel Liu Bang was assassinated. The news that Liu Bang was assassinated by the left minister of Huangsha Province and was seriously injured had spread throughout Diyu in just a few days. Emissaries from various powers rushed to Huangsha Province, and Wuqi did not want to be left behind. He left a celestial fiend puppet in Hai Province and pretended to be seriously injured, while he went straight to Huangsha Province. During the war, the officials of Diyu were very strict with the management of the teleportation formations. Wuqi spent a lot of effort to get here through the teleportation formation. When he arrived at Huangsha's house, it had been 3 days and 4 nights since Liu Bang was assassinated. Wuqi left the capital of Huangsha Province in a hurry and rushed to the place where Liu Bang was assassinated at the fastest speed, Yuya City. Yuya City was the most important city in Huangsha Province apart from the capital. It was also the city that was destroyed by the Stars of Myriad Immortal Alliance more than a year ago. The city was extremely rich in resources, producing a large number of rare metals and minerals. It was one of the important raw materials for the military court of Diyu to forge all kinds of upper-grade weapons and armors, as well as countless large war machines. Therefore, hundreds of millions of people lived around Yuya City all year round, relying entirely on mining for their livelihood. The attack of the Stars of Myriad Immortal Alliance had crushed hundreds of millions of people within thousands of miles around Yuya City. 60% of them were skilled miners and smelters, which had caused a devastating blow to the mining industry of Yuya City. Therefore, Huangsha Province was the largest province in Diyu that contributed the most to the encirclement of immortals and itinerant cultivators. Even the military court of Liangzhu had stationed an elite army of 300,000 soldiers in Huangsha Province, which was directly under the command of the human emperor, striving to wipe out all the immortals and itinerant cultivators in Huangsha province and the surrounding areas. In such an important place, it was reasonable for the angel Liu Bang to come to Yueya City to mediate. However, as soon as Liu Bang entered Yueya City, he was stabbed in the chest by Jing Mo, the left military minister of Huangsha province. Now his life was in danger, and his soul might scatter at any time. Such a big event immediately shook all sides of Yu dynasty, and all kinds of people rushed to the scene. Wuxia hurried through the boundless yellow sand with the innate escape method. He wanted to rush to Yueya City and see what kind of trick Liu Bang wanted to play. If he was not seriously injured, Wuxia was ready to take the opportunity to seriously injure him. If he was really seriously injured, Wuxia did not mind giving him a push, and even using the remote curse to teach his true spirit on the 8 Treasures Lotus platform a lesson. Of course, the 8 Treasures Lotus platform was the supreme treasure of the current Lord Buddha, and it was an innate spirit item born from a wisp of innate primal energy. It was very difficult to tamper with the 8 Treasures Lotus platform. But even if he could not destroy Liu Bang's true spirit, Wuxia wanted to teach him a lesson, and at the same time, annoy these cultivators of the Buddhist League. He had a bad feeling that the cultivators of the Buddhist League had colluded with the immortals from the heaven, and were carrying out their plan on Pangu continent with great fanfare, which could very well endanger him. Not only Wuxia himself, but also so many of his friends, brothers, relatives, and lovers. If he sat back and watched these people do whatever they wanted, the consequences would be very difficult to clean up. So he had to do something. Even if I am a mayfly trying to shake an iron tree, I will do something. Wuxia took a deep breath, and the thick earth element energy under the yellow sand within 100 miles quickly rushed into his body. Suddenly, the underground energy veins under him moved, and in the blink of an eye, Wuxia was hundreds of millions of miles away. With the innate escape art found in the Scroll of Stealing and the Kwafu chasing the sun step being combined, Wuxia could travel hundreds of millions of miles in a blink of an eye like a ghost, and without raising a single speck of dust, he came to Yueya City, located at the border of Huangsha province. Standing on the peak of a bronze-colored mountain, Wuxia looked down at the surroundings. The mountain was over 100 miles tall, and the surrounding mountains stretched for an unknown distance. Even with the eyesight of Wuxia's chaotic divine eyes, he could not see where the edge of the mountains was. To the west of Wuxia, the mountains formed a huge crescent-shaped valley, and in the middle of the valley was a large blue lake, whose water was also crescent-shaped. Between the lake and the mountains, along with the flow of the mountains and the water, was where Yueya City used to be. But the star of Myriad Immortal Alliance had completely flattened Yueya City, and a huge gap had appeared in both the mountains and the lake, adding a strange and ferocious look to the originally harmonious scene. The place where Wuxia was standing was the edge of the mountain range where the mountains had been destroyed. That day, the star had fallen near this place, shattering the mountains and collapsing the ground. Although Pangu continent had the ability to repair itself, the terrain had changed. The mountains that stretched like a screen had turned into a rugged stone forest here. It was as if a large piece of the crescent-shaped mountain had been bitten off, and the lake had spread along the damaged terrain, filling the stone forest with water. Next to the new stone forest, a city that was obviously newly built stood between the mountains and the rivers, surrounded by barracks filled with a towering murderous aura. At least 100,000 soldiers were stationed here. Hundreds of flying ships of various sizes were hovering in the sky, and right above the city was a strange-looking pyramid made entirely of black stones, with a total of 3 steps from top to bottom. The base of the pyramid measured about 1 mile in both length and width, and stood about 2,000 feet tall. It was divided into 3 parts from top to bottom, each connected by a steep staircase. Hundreds of oracles from the Directorate of Celestials were sitting cross-legged at the edge of the pyramid, shrouded in a hazy halo, with vague shadows of ghosts and deities hovering motionlessly above their heads. Vaguely visible primordial runes flickered on the surface of the dark pyramid, emanating a terrible pressure that made one's heart palpitate. With just a glance at the pyramid, Wuxia felt a chill run down his spine, as if there was a prehistoric beast hiding in it. It was a terrifying beast that killed people like scything flax. It was hiding in its lair, and was probably sleeping, but the aura emanating from it made Wuxia feel as if he had encountered his natural enemy. His muscles were all tensed up, and his heart was pounding madly. He could not wait to leave this place as soon as possible. Ao Buzin poked his head out of Wuqi's clothes, spat out a tiny flame, and said in a low voice, "That damned flaming tiger! Lao Tzu has finally digested all his divine power. Damn it, why is it the aura of Yazi? In terms of seniority, Lao Tzu has to address their patriarch as uncle, so this should be a little cub that was born later, right?" Yazi. Wuxia patted Ao Buzin on the head and said, "You mean there is a Yazi in that black pyramid?" Ao Buzin licked the corner of his mouth and murmured in a low voice, "This is clearly the Supreme Tower of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials, which proves that there is a Supreme Oracle guarding this place. How is this a pyramid? The tower has 3 grades, and this is a lower grade Supreme Oracle. TSK, an expert of the realm of Primordial Immortal." Chuckling, Ao Buzin said in a low voice, "A Supreme Oracle who has fused with the soul of a Yazi beast. Good heavens, he is also an expert who cultivates both magic and fleshly body. We can't afford to offend him, and it's best not to get close to him. An old fool like him who cultivates both magic and fleshly body, but has reached the realm of Supreme Oracle is the biggest headache for those immortals of the Celestial Court, and those bald donkeys of the Buddhist League. This old fellow in front of us can fight at least 3 immortals of the same realm as him at the same time." Wuxia gave Ao Buzin a look of horror. An oracle or warrior who had cultivated both magic and fleshly body to the realm of Primordial Immortal could fight 3 immortals of the same realm at the same time. Sensing the shock in Wuqi's heart, Ao Buzin began to count one by one. The soul of a Yazi beast is an expert of the realm of Primordial Immortal. His fleshly body is equivalent to a Primordial Immortal, and he can fight a Primordial Immortal head-on. Coupled with the Tao of ghost and deity he cultivates, the ghost god he worships is at least a Primordial Immortal. If he uses all these tricks one by one, he can easily deal with 3 immortals. Twitching his mouth, Ao Buzin nodded and said, "Of course, those 3 Primordial Immortals cannot have a Primordial Immortal artifact. Otherwise, a Primordial Immortal artifact would be equivalent to a Primordial Immortal who has cultivated successfully, and its power would be greater. If they have a Primordial Immortal artifact, the one who will be defeated will be this old fellow in front of us." Wuxia nodded slowly. That was reasonable. After all, who was a Primordial Immortal? For a Supreme Oracle, even if he cultivated both magic and fleshly body, to be able to fight 3 immortals at the same time was not taking Primordial Immortals seriously. That was reasonable. Half of an immortal's strength was in his own immortal artifact, and having a Primordial Immortal artifact and not having one made a huge difference. Staring at the Black Supreme Tower, Wuxia was wondering why there was such a powerful figure in this place. Suddenly, a faint blood mist drifted past Wuqi's feet. Wuxia quickly looked down and saw that the blood mist was actually a large, hazy flag, and a tall fiend figure was wrapped in it. The banner of Chiyu. And this guy. Wuqi's pupils constricted to the size of a needle tip. Chapter 618. The whistling wind rolled up countless grains of yellow sand, turning them into a murky sandstorm and rushing forward. Protected by the banner of Chiyu, Xiangyu transformed into a hazy blood mist and slowly moved forward in the sandstorm, approaching the newly built Yuya city step by step. All his attention was focused on the city and the military camp in front of him, and he did not notice that Wuxia was standing on the peak of a mountain tens of miles above him, looking down at him. Frowning, Wuxia sneered and said, "Great minds think alike. Both of us are eyeing Pangu continent, a fat piece of meat." He took a few deep breaths and circulated a wisp of chaotic energy across his cheeks, melting away the remaining wisp of Buddhist energy in his cheekbones. After that, Wuxia transformed into a gust of wind and blended into the sandstorm, moving forward cautiously at a distance of less than 3 miles behind Xiangyu. Wuxia was puzzled. What was Xiangyu doing here? And when did he come to Pangu continent? How many men did he bring? Did he bring the woman who Wuxia could not forget? The sandstorm soon blanketed the city, and the shouts of generals could be heard coming from every corner of the military camp. The human warriors with strong fleshly bodies walked out of their tents and slapped long iron stakes into the ground to reinforce the tents. The strong wind brought a great deal of sand and dust and smacked the tents, causing them to tremble violently, while the iron stakes were pushed along by the strong wind and rattled noisily on the ground. Wuxia followed Xiangyu and snuck into the camp. He watched as Xiangyu approached the back of a soldier who was reinforcing the tent, then broke the soldier's neck with ease. After that, he donned the soldier's armor and began strolling around the camp. Xiangyu was an expert in the art of military formations, and he was very familiar with all kinds of activities in the military camp. Now, in the sandstorm, the soldiers were all hiding in their tents, and few came out. On top of that, Xiangyu possessed a strange and unfathomable demonic technique, which allowed him to travel in the strong wind at any time. With that, he easily circled around the camp, and even circled a few rounds in the newly built city. It seemed that he could not find the man he was looking for. Shaking his head discontentedly, he covered his aura with the banner of Qiyu and snuck out of the military camp again. But as soon as he stepped out of the military camp, a cold laugh came from the supreme tower in the sky. Have you seen enough? If you have, then stay here. A strange whistling noise rang out as a plume of black smoke shot down from the supreme tower. Amidst the black smoke, a huge bony hand leaped out of it. It was about an acre in circumference, and with a suffocating pressure, it went straight towards Xiangyu and grabbed him with one swift move. Xiangyu gave a cold snort. His fleshly body suddenly swelled to hundreds of feet tall. Then he threw a punch at the bony hand. A loud boom rang out, and a few sparks flew out from the bony hand. Xiangyu gave a muffled snort, and his fist was stained with blood, which sprayed hundreds of feet away. A wisp of dark mist seeped into his arm from his injured fist, quickly turning his fist and arm pitch black. Then, the dark mist began to spread along his arm and into his body. The dark mist kept making shrill squeaking noises, as if there were countless rats hiding in Xiangyu's arm, and were about to gnaw at it until only bones were left. Xiangyu staggered back dozens of steps, knocking his head against a sentry tower in front of the military camp's gate. The nearly 1,000 feet tall sentry tower crumbled to pieces. 5 soldiers on duty on the tower, led by a low-ranking officer, leaped down from the tower. 5 broadswords and 1 longsword transformed into 6 beams of cold light, thrusting straight at Xiangyu's back. Wuqia shook his head. Xiangyu is still so impulsive. Does he think he can do whatever he wants in the enemy's camp just because he is protected by the banner of Qiyu? Wuqia had never considered that this was the imperial army from Liangzhu, the capital city of Diyu, under the direct command of the human emperor. Even the weakest soldier in this army had the overall strength that was at least strong enough to fight against a body cultivator of Heaven Immortal realm. Xiangyu's overall strength had just stepped into the realm of Heaven Immortal, and yet he dared to come here and do whatever he wanted? Sighing softly, Wuqia moved his body forward, sliced open the void soundlessly, and appeared behind Xiangyu. He pointed his finger out, and the star shark transformed into a clump of silvery green mist and shot out, enveloping the 6 soldiers. Countless tiny starlights spun and shot rapidly in the mist, piercing through the sturdy bodies of these soldiers. In just a blink of an eye, the power of stars condensed by the star shark had smashed the 6 soldiers to a pulp. Grabbing Xiangyu with one hand, Wuqia stomped his right foot on the ground and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, he had already brought Xiangyu hundreds of millions of miles away. After taking 18 steps in a row, Wuqia and Xiangyu were already 3 provinces away. Suddenly, someone beside Wuqia blew a light breath into Wuqia and Xiangyu's ears, and a hoarse and cold voice pierced into their ears like a steel needle. It is not easy to have such a level of attainment in the Kwafu chasing the sun step. Which prince's subordinate are you? Hehe, if you dare to offend me again, having your soul destroyed will be considered a light punishment. 2 muffled booms rang out, as both Wuqia and Xiangyu were severely wounded at the same time. Wuqia's spine exploded with a boom, leaving a fist-sized bloody hole in front of his chest. At the same time, blood burst out of Xiangyu's dantian and forehead. His dantian and spiritual ocean were severely wounded at the same time, and more than half of his magical power was gone. It almost knocked him down from the realm of heaven immortal to a mortal. Wuxia was scared out of his wits. He had taken 18 Quafu chasing the sun steps in a row, but the fearsome figure in the supreme tower had easily found him and Xiangyu, and had even given them a warning and a small punishment. Fortunately, Wuxia was using the Quafu chasing the sun step, a cultivation technique of the human race, which made the dreadful supreme oracle think that Wuxia was from one of the powers in the Yu dynasty. Perhaps he had some scruples of his own, which was why he showed mercy to Wuxia and Xiangyu. He dared not imagine what would have happened if he had fled with Xiangyu using an innate escape art, and the supreme oracle had found out that he was using an immortal art. Would he and Xiangyu have been wiped out by the supreme oracle in the blink of an eye? The sharp rebuke just now had nearly shattered his innate divine soul, shattered his spine, and nearly ripped his body to shreds. Both of the injuries were so close to taking his life. Just a little bit of insignificant force was enough to destroy Wuqi's soul, or completely destroy his fleshly body. This was the power of a supreme oracle. Wuxia staggered a few steps forward and coughed out a mouthful of blood. His legs went limp, and he fell heavily to the ground. Xiangyu was in an even worse state. His dantian and forehead were severely injured at the same time, and his eyes were rolling backward, with blood flowing out of his 7 orifices. His magic power was out of control under his skin, wriggling here and there like countless earthworms. It was a horrible sight to see. Shivering, Wuxia got to his feet. Ignoring Xiangyu's condition, he sat cross-legged on the ground and began to silently exercise the healing technique found in the true body of heaven and earth scripture. A purple rune that looked like it was forged of crystal emerged in front of Wuxia. Countless wisps of purple mist that could only be sensed by mystic arts, and could not be detected by naked eyes or divine sense, rushed out from under Pangu continent, and rushed into Wuqi's body. His shattered spine was rapidly regenerating, and one white bone after another was reforming his shattered skin and flesh at a speed visible to the naked eye. After more than 2 hours, Wuxia sprung to his feet. His fleshly body had been repaired, and the healing power of the true body of heaven and earth scripture was amazing. Waving his fists and kicking his legs, he walked up to Xiangyu and stuffed a few soul-nourishing and life-saving spirit pills into the mouth of Xiangyu, who was on the brink of death. Xiangyu's body trembled slightly, and he finally woke up from his coma. He coughed violently, coughing a few clots of dried blood from his throat. Before he could see Wuqi's face clearly, he cried out in a deep voice, "I am Xiangyu, the hegemon king of Western Shu. Thank you for saving my life today, my benefactor. I will repay you handsomely in the future." As the voice rang out, Xiangyu raised his head and recognized Wuqi's face at first glance, which was slightly deformed by Mao Niju's heavy blow. "Great Yan's Duke of Tianyan, Wuqi?" Xiangyu was stunned. Then he asked word by word. His tone had become extremely cold, as if the words were dug out from a 10,000-year-old glacier, making Wuqi shudder involuntarily. "Long time no see, hegemon king of Western Shu." With a smile on his face, Wuqi cupped his fist and greeted Xiangyu. Xiangyu let out a few strange laughs in a deep voice. Suddenly, he leaped up into the air, and when he had just jumped 10 feet into the air, a pitch-black spear appeared in his hand. With a loud roar of a tiger, he thrust the spear straight towards Wuqi's throat. A loud cracking noise rang out, as a purple electric arc burst out from the spear, thrusting towards Wuqi's body like a giant serpent. Wuqi stood still in front of Xiangyu with his hands clasped behind his back. The electric arc smashed accurately onto Wuqi's body, ripping Wuqi's clothes to shreds. Like a dragon, the electric arc smashed viciously onto Wuqi's body, shattering into countless tiny electric arcs and scattering in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the pitch-black spear was pointed right at Wuqi's throat. The spear bent abruptly, and with his eyes bloodshot, Xiangyu howled as he thrust the spear forward with all his might. A crisp sound rang out, and the spear exploded. With a muffled groan, Xiangyu was sent flying hundreds of feet away. His hands were badly mutilated by the broken spear handle, and he staggered back dozens of steps before falling heavily on one knee on the ground. "Bastard!" Xiangyu roared furiously, pointing his finger at Wuxia and saying, I'm going to pull out your tendons, peel off your skin, eat your flesh, and use your soul as a lampwick so that you will never be able to reincarnate. Audiobook wiggled his body and crawled onto Wuqi's shoulder. He glanced at Wuxia, then at Xiangyu, and said in a professional tone, You killed his father and stole his wife. You're not as old as him, so I'm sure you didn't kill his father, but stealing his wife. That's for sure. You've hooked up with his woman, haven't you? I hurry up and kill him. Kill his husband, steal his wife, and let his child call you his father. How great would that be? Wuxia almost coughed out a mouthful of blood. He glared at Audiobook, grabbed him by the neck and shoved him into his sleeve. Sighing softly, Wuxia cupped his fist at Xiangyu and said, You can't blame me for that. Xiangyu glared at Wuxia and was about to roar, but he suddenly froze and clenched his teeth. A few cracking sounds rang out, and many of his teeth were broken. Then he snorted coldly at Wuxia and said, From now on, don't ever show your face in front of Lao Tzu again. Or else, even if your cultivation base is 10,000 times stronger than Lao Tzu will still kill you. Xiangyu took a deep breath and slowly rose to his feet, fixing his blood-red eyes at Wuxia. After a long time, he suddenly transformed into a beam of blood-red light and shot up into the sky, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Wuxia stared at Xiangyu's fleeing beam in horror. This is not him. This is definitely not his style, he said in astonishment. Before his voice could fade away, a dark shadow suddenly emerged from the void behind him, and a cold gleam shot soundlessly toward the back of Wuqi's head. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.